Hi everyone, I know you are watching this content to accompany your sleep. So before we start, I want to know where you are watching from and what time you are watching. Also, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's jump straight into the story. In the quiet town of Palagonia, nestled in the heart of Sicily, Italy, the summer of 2015 was drawing to a close. The residents, known for their warm hospitality and tight-knit community, were preparing for the transition into autumn. Among them were Vincenzo Solano, 68, and his wife, Mercedes Ibanez, 70. Vincenzo, a native Sicilian, and Mercedes, originally from Catalonia, Spain, had met years prior while working in Germany. Their shared experiences as immigrants had forged a deep bond between them, leading them to settle in Palagonia over 4 decades ago. Here, they built a life, raised 2 daughters, Rosita and Manuela, and became beloved members of the community. Their home was a modest yet comfortable abode, reflecting the simplicity and contentment of their lives. Vincenzo was known for his gentle demeanor and love for gardening, often seen tending to his plants in the early morning hours. Mercedes, on the other hand, was celebrated for her culinary skills, frequently sharing traditional Spanish dishes with neighbors and friends. Their life was serene, marked by routine and the joys of family. However, the tranquility of Palagonia was shattered on the morning of August 30th, 2015. The sun had barely risen when the local police received a distressing call. Manuela, concerned after multiple unanswered calls to her parents, had decided to check on them. What she discovered was a scene of unimaginable horror. Her father, Vincenzo, lay lifeless in their bedroom, his throat brutally slashed. The room bore signs of a violent struggle, with overturned furniture and bloodstains marring the walls. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, a stark contrast to the home's usual warmth. Desperate to find her mother, Manuela's search led her to the courtyard. There, she found Mercedes's body, bearing injuries consistent with a fall from a significant height. The initial assessment suggested that she had been thrown from the balcony, a fall that had ended her life. The brutality of the acts was incomprehensible, leaving Manuela in a state of profound shock and grief. As the news spread, the community of Palagonia was engulfed in sorrow and disbelief. The Solano Ibanez couple had been pillars of the community, known for their kindness and generosity. The idea that someone could harbor such malice against them was beyond comprehension. The local authorities, recognizing the gravity of the situation, launched an immediate and thorough investigation. The initial findings painted a grim picture. Vincenzo appeared to have been attacked in his sleep, a cowardly act that spoke to the perpetrator's ruthlessness. Mercedes's injuries suggested a desperate attempt to escape her assailant, culminating in her tragic fall. Further examination revealed additional wounds on both bodies, inflicted by a sharp instrument, possibly a screwdriver or a similar tool. The nature of the injuries indicated a frenzied attack, driven by uncontrollable rage or desperation. In the midst of processing the crime scene, investigators received a significant lead. Earlier that morning, security personnel at the Caraminio Refugee Center, located not far from Palagonia, had detained an 18-year-old Ivorian asylum seeker named Mamadou Kamara. He had been apprehended while attempting to leave the center with a bag containing suspicious items. Among the contents were personal belongings, including jewelry and electronics, later identified as property of the deceased couple. Additionally, Kamara was found wearing clothes that, upon closer inspection, were determined to belong to Vincenzo. The evidence was compelling, but the authorities were cautious. The brutality of the crime, coupled with the sensitive nature of the suspect's status as an asylum seeker, necessitated a meticulous and unbiased investigation. Kamara was taken into custody for further questioning, while forensic teams worked tirelessly to gather more evidence from both the crime scene and the items found in his possession. As the investigation progressed, the community grappled with a complex mix of emotions. Palagonia had a history of welcoming outsiders, and the Caraminio Center had been a focal point for discussions about immigration in the region. The alleged involvement of a resident from the center in such a heinous crime threatened to ignite tensions and challenge the town's values of inclusivity and compassion. In the days following the murders, local authorities increased their presence in the area, both to reassure the public and to prevent any potential acts of retribution. Community leaders and local officials called for calm, urging residents not to let anger and fear overshadow the principles of justice and due process. The focus remained on uncovering the truth and ensuring that the perpetrator, regardless of their background, was held accountable for the atrocious acts committed against Vincenzo and Mercedes. The investigation continued, with each piece of evidence bringing the authorities closer to understanding the events of that fateful night. The path to justice was fraught with challenges, but the resolve of the investigators and the resilience of the Pelagonia community remained steadfast. The memory of Vincenzo and Mercedes served as a poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring strength of a community united in the face of tragedy. The investigation into the brutal murders of Vincenzo Solano and Mercedes Ibanez continued with mounting urgency. The small town of Pelagonia, once a peaceful enclave of old traditions and quiet routines, had been thrust into the national spotlight. News of the killings spread quickly across Italy, reigniting debates about immigration, crime, and the challenges of integrating asylum seekers. Television crews arrived, reporters swarmed the narrow streets, and local residents found themselves at the center of a story that extended far beyond their community. While public speculation ran rampant, investigators worked tirelessly to piece together a clear timeline of events. The forensic team combed through the victim's home, documenting every trace of evidence left behind by the killer. Blood spatter analysis suggested that Vincenzo had been attacked while still in bed, caught off guard in what should have been the safety of his own home. Defensive wounds on his hands and arms indicated that he had struggled against his attacker, but the deep gash across his throat left little doubt. Whoever had done this wanted him dead in the most brutal way possible. Mercedes's body was examined with equal care. Her injuries, consistent with a fall from the balcony, showed multiple fractures and internal trauma. But there was something more. Cuts and bruises on her arms and torso suggested she had been assaulted before being thrown to her death. Investigators theorized that she had woken up during the attack on her husband, either startled by the commotion or having sensed an intruder. In a desperate attempt to escape, she may have tried to flee, only to be overpowered and thrown from the balcony. One of the most chilling aspects of the crime was the apparent lack of forced entry. The front door was closed but not locked, suggesting that the killer had either been let in by the victims, perhaps under false pretenses, or had entered through another means. This detail led police to suspect that the assailant may have had prior knowledge of the home's layout or habits of the couple. The nature of the crime, sudden, violent, and without clear financial motive, only deepened the mystery. Meanwhile, Mamadou Camara, the 18-year-old asylum seeker detained at the Caraminio Refugee Center, remained in custody. Under questioning, he denied any involvement in the murders, claiming he had never been to the victim's home. His demeanor was a mix of defiance and confusion, as if he could not fully comprehend the gravity of the situation. However, the items found in his possession, jewelry, a cell phone, and clothing belonging to Vincenzo, painted a damning picture. A deeper investigation into Camara's background revealed that he had arrived in Italy months earlier after a perilous journey across the Mediterranean. Like thousands of others, he had fled war, poverty, and instability in his home country, seeking refuge in Europe. The refugee center at Caraminio, where he had been housed, was known for overcrowding and frequent clashes between different groups of migrants. It was a place of frustration, uncertainty, and at times desperation. Security footage from the center provided a crucial breakthrough. The recordings showed Camara leaving the facility late at night, hours before the estimated time of the murders. He had managed to evade the guards, slipping away unnoticed. More damningly, footage captured him returning in the early morning, carrying a bag similar to the one later found in his possession. His clothing appeared different from when he had left, raising further suspicions. As forensic experts examined the clothing and items recovered from Camara, they made a discovery that would significantly strengthen the case against him. Traces of Vincenzo's blood were found on the fabric. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. It directly linked Camara to the crime scene. Yet, the motive remained elusive. Why would an 18-year-old asylum seeker, with no apparent connection to the elderly couple, commit such a horrific act? Theories emerged. Some investigators believed it was a burglary gone wrong, that Camara had broken into the home with the intent to steal, but had been caught in the act, leading to a violent confrontation. Others speculated that drug use or mental instability might have played a role, though no immediate evidence supported this. There was also the possibility of a more calculated crime, one driven by anger, revenge, or an unknown grudge. As the case progressed, tensions in Pelagonia escalated. The murders had already sparked outrage, but the revelation that an asylum seeker was the prime suspect ignited deeper, more volatile emotions. Protests erupted outside the Kara Minio Refugee Center, with locals demanding its closure. Right-wing political figures seized the moment, using the tragedy to fuel anti-immigration rhetoric. Graffiti began appearing on walls throughout the town, bearing slogans that called for an end to asylum policies and the expulsion of migrants. What had once been a quiet town was now a battleground of political and social discord. But amid the anger, there was also sorrow. The daughters of Vincenzo and Mercedes, devastated by the loss of their parents, pleaded for justice but also for reason. In a tearful statement to the press, Rosita, the eldest, spoke of the love her parents had for Pelagonia and their belief in kindness. They opened their hearts to everyone, she said, and they did not deserve this. But we cannot let this tragedy be used to spread more hate. The trial of Mamadou Camara moved forward rapidly. Prosecutors, armed with forensic evidence, security footage, and witness testimonies, built a strong case against him. Camara, maintaining his innocence, changed his story multiple times, at one point claiming he had been forced by others to steal from the house, at another insisting he had found the items discarded near the road. His shifting narrative only worked against him, reinforcing the perception of guilt. With the weight of evidence against him, the court reached a decision. Camara was convicted of the murders of Vincenzo Solano and Mercedes Ibanez. He was sentenced to life in prison, a verdict that brought some closure to the grieving families, but did little to heal the deeper wounds left on Pelagonia. In the aftermath, the town struggled to regain its sense of normalcy. The tragedy of that September night in 2015 would never be forgotten, a grim reminder of how violence could tear through even the most peaceful of communities. The home where Vincenzo and Mercedes had once lived, where they had spent decades building a life together, remained empty, a silent monument to the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. Yet, life in Pelagonia continued. The seasons changed, the markets reopened, and the town's rhythms resumed. But in quiet moments, when the streets emptied and the sun dipped below the horizon, the memory of what had happened lingered. A crime so brutal, so senseless, had left its mark, not just on the family of the victims, but on an entire town, forever altered by the darkness that had once visited its doorstep. The trial of Mamadou Camara had concluded with a life sentence, but the impact of the crime lingered far beyond the courtroom. In Pelagonia, the murders of Vincenzo Solano and Mercedes Ibanez had left a scar, an unspoken weight that settled over the town like an autumn fog. The home where they had lived, once filled with laughter and the smell of freshly baked bread, stood empty. Its windows, once open to welcome neighbors, were now closed, the curtains drawn like eyelids over a restless past. No one spoke of buying it. No one wanted to live in a place where such horror had occurred. The daughters of the victims, Rosita and Manuela, struggled to move forward. The pain of their loss was compounded by the media frenzy that had surrounded the case. Every headline, every televised debate about immigration and crime, felt like another wound. They had buried their parents, but the world refused to let them rest. Strangers wrote letters, some offering condolences, others using the tragedy to push their own agendas. Politicians continued to argue about the implications of the case, twisting their parents' deaths into a talking point for their campaigns. Rosita tried to return to her job as a schoolteacher, but the whispers in the hallways followed her. Manuela, who had been the one to discover the crime scene, found herself plagued by nightmares. She could not shake the image of her father's lifeless body, of the dried blood on the floor, of her mother's broken frame in the courtyard. Therapy helped, but only so much. The trauma was not something she could leave behind. It was stitched into the fabric of her existence. Meanwhile, the town itself remained divided. For some, the case confirmed their worst fears, that the influx of migrants into Sicily had made their once safe streets dangerous. For others, it was a reminder that violence and cruelty were not confined to any one group of people, that evil could exist in any form. But the fear was tangible. People began locking their doors at night. The elderly, once comfortable sitting outside their homes late into the evening, now retreated indoors at sunset. A silent shift had taken place, one that could not be measured in statistics, but was deeply felt in the rhythm of daily life. At the Kara Minio Refugee Center, the mood was tense. The case had cast a long shadow over the facility, fueling resentment from both inside and outside its walls. The other residents of the center, many of whom had fled war and persecution, felt the weight of Camara's crime hanging over them. They faced increased hostility from locals, who now viewed them with suspicion. There were reports of harassment, of shopkeepers refusing service, of slurs muttered under breath as they walked the streets. The crime of one man had tainted them all in the eyes of many. The Italian government, already struggling with the broader European migration crisis, faced pressure to tighten security at refugee centers and implement stricter policies for asylum seekers. In the wake of the murders, new measures were put in place, making it harder for migrants to leave the centers without supervision. Protests erupted, some demanding harsher immigration policies, others calling for fair treatment of refugees. The debate raged on, but for the people of Pelagonia, the focus remained on the 2 lives that had been lost. As the years passed, the memory of the crime remained, though its sharp edges dulled with time. The newspapers moved on to other stories. The debates shifted to new controversies. But for those who had known Vincenzo and Mercedes, the pain never fully faded. Their absence was felt at family gatherings, in the empty chairs where they once sat, in the moments when laughter would rise only to be dampened by the realization that they were gone. Rosita and Manuela eventually made the difficult decision to sell their parents' home. It had become too painful to hold on to, a relic of a past they could not reclaim. A young couple from out of town purchased it, unaware of its history. They painted the walls, replaced the furniture, and filled it with new memories. But the neighbors still looked at the house with different eyes, still felt a chill when they walked past at night. Justice had been served, but justice was not the same as closure. The town had learned that evil did not always come in the form of shadows and whispered threats. It could arrive silently, without warning, and change everything in a single night. The streets of Pelagonia remained the same. The church bells still rang, the market still bustled with life. But beneath the surface, there was an understanding that had not been there before. No place was truly safe. No door was ever completely locked. And sometimes the worst nightmares were the ones that happened while you were still awake. Klondike Bishimbayev was born on April 11, 1980, in Gil, Kazakh SSR. Klondike Bishimbayev grew up with his younger sister Irujin, born in 1984. He received 3 higher educations, studying at Kazakh Academy of Management, TAZ University, and George Washington University through a presidential scholarship. At 26, he defended his PhD thesis in economic sciences. Klondike began his career as a bank manager in 2000. He briefly interned at the Ministry of Economy, then held senior positions in large companies before returning to the ministry in 2016. He became the young head of the ministry, but was dismissed 8 months later due to a bribery scandal, sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, he was released on parole after just 1 year. In his personal life, Klondike was married twice. His first wife, whom he married in 1999, and had a son in 2000. They divorced in 2004. In 2006, he married, with whom he had 3 children before divorcing in 2020. After a few years, he married Sultanat Nuknova. Sultanat Nuknova was born on May 15, 1992, in Pavlodar, Kazakhstan. She was the youngest of 2 children to businessman father and economist mother. Her uncle was a prominent politician. As a schoolgirl, Sultanat became interested in astrology, studying literature and making accurate predictions for friends and classmates. She turned her hobby into a career, achieving success quickly. Sultanat promoted her astrological services on social media, offering consultations, forecasts, and guidance on goal achievement, career choice, and spiritual growth. She also gave advice on love affairs and relationships, with a client base consisting only of women and girls. She quickly achieved financial independence by doing what she loved. Her services were in high demand, with consultations scheduled months in advance. She had gained a large following on social media and was living her dream life. In spring 2022, Klondike stumbled upon Sultanat's page on a popular social network. He liked Sultanat and decided to contact her for an astrological consultation, but she turned him down, saying she only served women. This rejection only fueled his interest, and the politician persistently tried to get her attention, showering her with compliments, convinced that only she could help him as a trusted specialist. Sultanat was flattered, but refused to meet Klondike, who repeatedly asked her out despite Sultanat offering online consultations. He persisted for months, gathering information about her life, habits, and interests, but she remained uninterested. Sultanat initially refused to meet the man, but eventually agreed to a meeting for face-to-face counseling. Despite his good impression, polite behavior, and courtesy, she told her brother that he was not her type and they wouldn't match. Initially, Sultanat was not worried about Klondike because she knew she could keep him. However, within a month, the situation changed when Klondike gained influence by befriending a respected older member of the family, Sultanat's grandmother. Klondike asked to speak to Sultanat's grandmother, asking for her support in case Sultanat changed her mind about marrying him. This gesture touched Sultanat, but she still refused to pursue a relationship with him. Sultanat visited her parents in Pavlodar in fall 2022 and mentioned no serious changes in her personal life were expected. She confided in her brother that the 12-year age difference with Klondike confused her, and she wasn't attracted to him, also citing astrological incompatibility. Sultanat's brother was shocked to see a post on his social media that his sister had accepted Klondike's marriage proposal just a month after their visit. This news surprised both her family and friends, as she had recently said that nothing serious would happen. A few months later, in December 2022, they held a luxury wedding at a budget establishment in Astana. The marriage was not officially registered, with they opting for a mosque ceremony instead. Sultanat's attitude towards her partner changed significantly after the wedding. She praised his intelligence, education, and conversation skills to friends and denied his involvement in a corruption case that led to his brief imprisonment, claiming he was framed. From the outside, they seemed happy. He showered her with gifts, and she called him the perfect husband. Friends envied their relationship, thinking she was lucky. However, this didn't last. After the wedding, they moved into his parents' house, where his mother, Almira, spoiled her with gifts and protected her from household chores, but couldn't shield her from her son's true nature. Sultanat would periodically visit her parents with her husband, but she wouldn't invite them to her home because it would annoy Klondike and cause arguments. At first, none of her relatives were aware of this. However, less than a month after the wedding, on New Year's Eve, Sultanat's brother visited and witnessed a disturbing scene. A large, festive table had been set, but the celebration was only for the immediate family. When Klondike's cousin and his wife arrived with gifts for everyone, Sultanat was embarrassed because she didn't have a gift in return. She quickly found a solution by giving Klondike's cousin's wife a bottle of expensive perfume that her husband had bought her the day before, but she hadn't had a chance to open it yet. Klondike was not just displeased, but enraged by her actions. He yelled at her, claiming she had no right to give away something he had paid for, and began insulting her. The guests quickly left, and when her parents tried to intervene, they were rudely shut down. In a fit of rage, Klondike overturned the table, spilling food and drinks everywhere, and ruining the New Year's Eve celebration. Sultanat's brother was shocked by the scene and didn't know how to react. The next day, Sultanat confided in him over the phone that her husband's behavior had changed dramatically since their wedding, and she was unsure of the reason, but hoped the situation would improve with time. Sultanat Nukanova's brother advised her to end the relationship and return home, but she flatly refused. 2 months later, she sent him selfies showing severe bruises on her face, asking him not to ask any questions. Concerned, her brother tried to contact her, but she didn't answer his calls. He then reached out to her husband, Klondike, who agreed to meet with him. During their meeting, Klondike told Sultanat's brother to stay out of their business and refused to explain the cause of the bruises on his wife's face. Klondike was also unable to account for Sultanat's whereabouts, which filled him with uneasy thoughts. Fortunately, Sultanat was eventually found at her parents' country home. Despite the pleas of loved ones, Sultanat returned to her husband, insisting that she loved him and was willing to do anything to save their marriage. For a while, he behaved impeccably, showering her with gifts and promising to change for her sake. They even took a vacation together to a popular resort in the Maldives, where they appeared to be very happy. Sultanat didn't explicitly complain about her marriage, but her behavior and appearance changed. She lost weight, became withdrawn, and wore revealing clothing, possibly to hide bruises. She stopped working as an astrologer and blogger, and only posted happy photos with her husband on social media. Klondike took away her source of income, making her reliant on him. She was not allowed to socialize without his permission and was monitored at all times. Despite appearing perfect to outsiders, their relationship was actually controlling and suffocating. Sultanat confessed to her friend that her husband exerted total control over her. Forbidding her to work or contact her parents without his knowledge was irrationally jealous, accusatory, and abusive. Despite her friend's horror and advice to leave him, she insisted she just wanted to talk, not be advised. They sought help from a family psychologist to save their marriage. Sultanat's husband rejected her therapist options and instead chose his own specialist, who blamed Sultanat for all their problems. She suspected her husband had hired the therapist to humiliate her. In summer 2023, Sultanat tried to leave him and stay with her parents, but her husband appeared a week later, asking for another chance and suggesting a change of environment to save their marriage. Sultanat hoped having a child would change her husband's attitude, but she couldn't get pregnant. After a family dinner in October, she briefly left her husband and moved into a rented apartment found by her brother. However, she returned to her husband 10 days later and even remarried him in a mosque ceremony, which she personally told her family about. On November 5th, she invited her family and close friends to her cousin's restaurant. Klondike made a good impression with his chivalrous behavior, being attentive and affectionate towards her. Everyone believed his feelings were genuine, but tragedy was looming. On November 9th, a relative contacted Sultanat's brother over the phone, sounding frightened as she asked about the truth of a social media rumor. After clarification, she shared a news link which reported that a former economy minister had taken the life of his young wife. Sultanat had asked to stay with him for a night after threatening to leave her husband. He agreed and told her where to find the spare keys, but she never arrived and her phone stopped working. He rushed to her house, but found no one there and her husband was not answering his phone, which made things even more concerning. The decision was made to immediately go to the family restaurant, where Sultanat was last in contact, to search for answers. While on the way, he received a call from his frightened parents, who had also read the news and were trying to find out what had really happened. However, he couldn't provide them with any information and only promised to look into it. When he arrived at the restaurant, he was met by police officers who expressed their condolences and informed him that his sister had sadly passed away before receiving medical attention. Overwhelmed and disbelieving, he struggled to accept the news, but tragically, it was confirmed to be true. By the time he arrived, the main suspect, Klondike, had already been arrested and taken to the station. Klondike denied any guilt, claiming that the event was a terrible accident and that he was trying to help his wife. Also, the restaurant owner was taken into custody on suspicion of being involved in the incident. Several months ago, on the evening of November 8, 2023, Sultanat and Klondike and their friends attended a concert by singer Dima Belan. The loud music made it difficult for their friends to follow the conversation between the spouses, who got into a heated argument. Initially, their friends thought they were just discussing something, but it soon became clear that they was engaged in a full-blown fight. They stormed out of the concert hall without saying a word to anyone and went to the restaurant Bao, where they continued to quarrel in a private VIP booth. Camera footage shows Klondike taking several bottles of alcohol from the bar and joining his wife in the booth. As they drank wine and discussed their relationship, she told him that she couldn't continue like this and planned to leave him. Infuriated by her statement, Klondike started shouting and threatening her, even slapping Sultanat. After the altercation, she called her brother and told him she would be coming to his house for the night, having finally made up her mind to leave her husband. Around midnight, she stepped outside, intending to go to her brother's house, but her husband caught up with her and the argument continued. The surveillance footage reveals a 15-minute argument between them, after which Klondike convinced his spouse to re-enter the building. They continued to quarrel in the vestibule and eventually secluded themselves in a stall with no camera coverage, making it impossible to determine exactly what occurred inside. In the hallway, cameras recorded Klondike aggressively pursuing his wife, Sultanat, as she attempted to create distance. He grabbed her hands, shook her, and pushed her against the wall. Klondike's lawyer downplayed these actions, describing them as stroking. However, Sultanat tried to escape and locked herself in the toilet to evade her husband's aggression. Undeterred, he kicked the door, resulting in corresponding injuries. After forcing his wife to open the door, Klondike physically assaulted her, striking her multiple times in the face. He berated her, claiming that she lived at his expense. The events that followed are unclear, but Klondike alleged that his wife had an angry outburst and, in a fit of rage, removed all her clothes and jewelry, flushing them down the toilet to demonstrate her independence from him. According to another account, Klondike allegedly forced his wife to undress, intending to humiliate her further after the gold jewelry was lost down the drain. This led to Klondike becoming enraged, punching his wife in the face multiple times, and then pushing her with such force that she fell and hit the toilet. However, during the trial, Klondike claimed that his wife was intoxicated and had fallen several times while undressing, hitting her head on the tiles and plumbing fixtures. Klondike and his wife had planned to go home after leaving the restaurant, but he refused to drive due to his intoxication. He was ashamed of his drunken wife, who was wearing only underwear under her coat and didn't want to call a cab. They decided to return to their VIP booth instead. However, when Sultanat stopped to look at her reflection in the mirror, her husband forcefully pushed her towards the exit. This quickly escalated into a brutal assault as he mercilessly beat her with his hands and feet and dragged her by the hair. At around 7 o'clock in the morning, he dragged her back to the VIP cabin, where he continued his attack. Klondike ultimately caused severe harm to Sultanat, but during the trial, he claimed he had no involvement in her injuries. According to him, she had fallen and hit the floor and furniture on her own, and then fell asleep on the sofa. He alleged that he noticed a bruise on her face, but rather than seeking medical attention, he consulted a fortune teller to determine if everything was all right with his wife. The fortune teller told Klondike his wife was drunk and needed sleep, so he calmed down and didn't touch her. Later, he realized she wasn't breathing and called his brother, Bakun Banov, also the restaurant owner. Together, they deleted CCTV footage, claiming it showed his wife's indecent behavior. Banov called an ambulance in the evening, but she had already died. He claimed to have tried CPR, but it was too late. Both brothers were arrested by law enforcers. Klondike's former wife, Nazim, was also under scrutiny several years ago when her then husband was arrested on corruption charges. She defended him at the time, but soon after his release, she filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and claiming she had outgrown the marriage. However, after her ex-husband was accused of brutally murdering his new girlfriend, Nazim gave a candid interview, admitting that she believes him to be capable of such a crime. She explained that her 14-year marriage to Klondike changed dramatically in 2011 after the birth of their second child. Klondike became increasingly aggressive, selfish, and narcissistic, thinking that the world should revolve around him. Nazim also revealed that her husband frequently cheated on her, openly flaunting his infidelities. However, it wasn't until his phone data was accessed during his 2017 arrest that she discovered the full extent of his cheating. He had multiple mistresses, and they constantly changed. After Klondike was released from prison, his behavior became even more violent and aggressive, according to Nazim. A disagreement erupted between them a month later, sparked by a minor issue. However, Klondike's reaction was excessive, as he became enraged and ripped a toilet lid from the wall with his bare hands, throwing it at Nazim. Although she dodged, the incident made her realize that the marriage was unsalvageable, in her opinion. Klondike had apparently restrained his true nature for a long time, because he knew Nazim wouldn't tolerate his darker impulses. Klondike had a sinister strategy. He initially chose a victim, tested her limits, and pushed her to see how much she would tolerate. Once he was convinced that she wouldn't leave or complain, he revealed his true self as a sophisticated sadist. The trial of Klondike began in March 2024, with relatives of Sultanat pushing for an open trial to prevent him from using his wealth and connections to influence witnesses and judges. Klondike, who had previously been convicted of a serious offense but released on parole, requested a jury trial to avoid a life sentence. A jury of 12 was selected, and in this case, a life sentence would require a unanimous decision from all jurors and the judge, a very unlikely outcome. Klondike denies premeditated murder, claiming the event was an accident. He says his spouse provoked him, but video recordings contradict him. Initially, authorities considered charging him with domestic violence, a crime with lenient punishment in Kazakhstan. However, this sparked outrage, particularly from the victim's mother, who feels her son-in-law may get off too lightly, undermining her faith in justice. A law was approved in April 2024 to toughen penalties for domestic violence in Kazakhstan following public outrage. Klondike tried to pressure his brother into giving false testimony, and also attempted to discredit his late wife in court, calling her an inadequate, unbalanced, and alcoholic who provoked him. He claimed he acted in a state of passion, hitting her only a few times, and that her other injuries were self-inflicted from falling under the influence of alcohol. However, Klondike was alleged that he didn't allow called medics for Sultanat, and was instead concerned with deleting footage from cameras. Klondike ordered his brother to fake his wife's phone activity, making it seem like she was home. However, the plan didn't work. Klondike was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 24 years. Klondike's brother Bakun Banov was given a 4-year sentence for complicity. Sultanat's family expressed dissatisfaction with the court's decision. Her father hoped for a life sentence for his former son-in-law, calling any other verdict unfair. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Antonia Barra. Antonia was born in the late 1980s to a loving family that valued closeness and togetherness. Her parents, Alejandro and Marcela, raised 5 children in a spacious home, providing a nurturing environment where care and attention were abundant. The children were well-behaved and kind, and the household was generally free of significant problems. Antonia, however, stood out from her siblings due to her exceptional qualities from a young age. She was remarkably perceptive, responsible, and ambitious, which made her a source of great pride for her parents. She consistently excelled academically, had positive relationships with her teachers, and had clear plans for her future. Antonia's aspirations included traveling and living a fulfilling life. After high school, Antonia successfully enrolled in her preferred university and began pursuing a highly competitive major. As a freshman, she dedicated herself to mastering the fundamentals of her chosen profession and actively participated in both academic and social activities, forming close bonds with like-minded friends who shared her interests and ambitions. Antonia had become particularly close to Consuelo Uribe, a law student. They friends enjoyed spending time together, going shopping, attending parties, and socializing. Their friendship deepened over time. When Antonia's boyfriend Rodrigo broke up with her, Consuelo suggested a distraction to help her cope with the heartbreak. Antonia, struggling to come to terms with the breakup, welcomed her friend's idea. To take her mind off the past and briefly escape her sadness, Antonia and Consuelo planned a trip to Pucón, a tourist town in Chile, to celebrate the country's Independence Day on September 18th. The music festival was scheduled to take place at the Black Room Club on the evening of September 17th. At around 6:30 p.m., Antonia, Consuelo, and 3 other friends, including Consuelo's boyfriend, set off for Pucón. The trip was smooth, and upon arrival, the group stayed in separate accommodations, with they staying in a summer house owned by the Uribe family. After 8 p.m., they got ready to head to a party at Black Room, a well-known spot that promised an unforgettable night. Before leaving, Antonia texted her dad, who reminded her to be careful around people she didn't know. Antonia assured him that being cautious was second nature to her. They had a great time chatting and dancing with friends. As fate would have it, Martin and Antonia unexpectedly ran into each other at the club. They were thrilled to see each other and spent the evening together, chatting and dancing. Throughout the night, Antonia would occasionally leave Martin's side to check in with her friend and greet other male acquaintances she had met while bar hopping. However, she didn't realize how much she had been drinking, likely due to the long drive and her empty stomach. This was unusual for her, as she normally didn't let herself get carried away with alcohol. Consuelo told Antonia it was time to leave the club, but Antonia was having too much fun and refused to go. Consuelo warned her to stop drinking and think about leaving, but Antonia was determined to stay. Despite Consuelo's concerns, Antonia chose to stay at the club, and Consuelo left without her. However, Antonia would soon come to regret her decision. One of their friends stayed at the club and saw what happened next. He later shared what he saw during the investigation and in court. He said that Martin started talking to Antonia and then took her hand, leading her towards the exit. Antonia seemed unsure and confused, likely because she had been drinking too much. Although she was in a daze, Antonia didn't seem to resist or mind being led away. It was unclear if she even knew what was happening, but external surveillance footage told a different story. According to Martin's friends, they left the club in 2 cars, but there was no room for her, so she ended up walking with them. Along the way, they passed a store, and footage showed that the man had forced her to enter. She was visibly intoxicated and unable to resist. Throughout the night, Martin, who was somewhat more sober than the others, attempted to exert control over the situation. The footage captured moments of Martin being overly affectionate towards her and trying to kiss her, despite her clear reluctance and attempts to pull away. After arriving upstairs around 9 a.m., Consuelo checked her messages and found a voice message from her friend Antonia. Initially, Consuelo had trouble making out what Antonia was saying, but after listening more closely, she caught a few words. Antonia was asking to be picked up, but Consuelo didn't know exactly where she was. To find her, Consuelo used her GPS and, accompanied by her boyfriend Jose, headed to the location indicated. Upon entering the house, Consuelo and Jose were shocked to find Martin standing naked, attempting to cover himself with a pillow. When Consuelo asked about her friend Antonia, Martin claimed he didn't know where she was. However, they soon found Antonia upstairs in one of the rooms, lying on a bed in her underwear, crying quietly. Jose carried her to the car, and Consuelo asked what had happened, but Antonia was too distraught to explain. At the summer house, Consuelo and Jose tried to comfort Antonia, holding her and talking to her. Eventually, Antonia opened up about what had happened. She confessed that Martin had taken advantage of her against her will, leaving her feeling powerless. After learning about the incident, Jose and Consuelo urged Antonia to report the attacker to the police and pursue justice. However, Antonia declined, fearing that her parents and the public would find out and judge her. Instead, she chose to silently cope with the trauma and try to heal on her own, asking Jose and Consuelo to keep the incident private. During a conversation with her father, Antonia tried to respond normally to his light-hearted question about whether she had been drinking too much. However, her response unintentionally revealed her distress. The next day, Antonia met with Martin to discuss the incident, but he was uncooperative and arrogant. Martin claimed that the events of the previous night were consensual, which made Antonia realize that she would not receive the truth or an apology from him. She understood that she needed to try to move forward. Antonia stayed quiet and acted normal for 3 weeks. A close childhood friend claimed not to notice anything unusual, but Antonia's classmates observed that her memory was faltering and her thoughts were disorganized. But sometime later, Alejandro eventually discovered the truth about his daughter. Alejandro shared his daughter Antonia's heartbreaking story, which sparked a nationwide movement. Multiple women came forward with similar allegations against Martin, leading to 6 new charges and his exposure as a serial offender. The Martin family sought court protection for their personal information, which had been leaked online. They claimed that the online harassment, including insults, threatening messages, and false information, had violated their constitutional right to privacy. The court agreed, and on June 12, 2020, it ordered Antonia's relatives to stop sharing information about the Martin family on social media and to refrain from publishing anything that could compromise them. However, this decision sparked widespread outrage in Chile. Many people felt that the court was protecting the suspect rather than the victims. On July 21st, the Antonia family appealed the decision to the Supreme Court, but their appeal was rejected. The suspect's lawyer then requested protective measures on his client's behalf, but the suspect was eventually charged with multiple counts of attack. The case, known as the Antonia case, became a rallying cry for victims of violence in Chile. For many women, it marked a turning point, and they began to come forward to share their own experiences after years of silence. On July 22nd, a surprising turn of events occurred when the court changed Martin's preventive measure from detention to house arrest, effectively releasing him. The judge clarified that this decision did not imply a reduced sentence. Meanwhile, the prosecutor had charged Martin with 5 counts of misconduct, but the court only recognized 2. This sparked widespread outrage, with thousands of people taking to the streets to protest the halt in investigations and the decision to place Martin under house arrest. In response to public pressure, the authorities appealed the decision, and the judiciary quickly overturned the house arrest order, taking Martin back into custody. Antoniette stressed the importance of taking action against Martin, as his behavior made women vulnerable. In February 2021, investigators found Martin's phone, which contained a disturbing collection of photos of women's underwear, suggesting a trophy collection. The 400-page police report included statements from multiple victims, witnesses, and people close to Martin and Antoniette's. A childhood teacher described Martin as a smart and cheerful child, but noted that he had an unusual interest in intimate topics. Some women recalled that Martin had inappropriately touched them when they were children, but at the time, no one thought much of it. On June 14, 2022, the criminal court in Tomoko began its hearings, which were expected to last over a month. During this time, the prosecution presented evidence, expert testimonies, and witness statements. The court started watching a CCTV. Video footage revealed that Antoniette was unable to control the situation. On August 26th, Martin was sentenced to 20 years in prison for crimes against intimacy and intimacy-related aggression. However, on December 29th, the Supreme Court accepted the defense's appeal, disagreeing with the verdict. A new trial was scheduled for spring 2023. In a related development, Martin's original lawyers resigned on March 16th, and the public defense took over his case. The second trial began on April 24, 2024, focusing on 5 counts of violence and 2 counts of forced intimacy. During the trial, Martin waived his right to remain silent and provided his account of the events. He claimed that his actions were the result of severe intoxication. However, the prosecutor countered that by drinking with the victims, he had taken advantage of their vulnerability. Ultimately, Martin was found guilty on July 7, 2023. The federal prosecution sought a prison sentence of 41 years, but on July 28, 2023, Martin only was sentenced to 17 years in prison for committing 7 intimacy-related crimes against 6 victims. Since he had already spent time in custody, he would serve 14 years. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lizzie Marriott. In the fall of 2012, Lizzie Marriott began her studies in marine biology at the University of New Hampshire. To reduce her living expenses, she moved out of her family home in Massachusetts, where she lived with her parents, Bob and Melissa Lizzie, and relocated to Chester to live with her aunt and uncle, Tony and Becky Hannah. Lizzie quickly became a beloved member of her aunt and uncle's family. She had a passion for marine animals, which led her to pursue a degree in marine biology. Although she was now 2 hours away from her parents, they remained close and kept in regular contact. Lizzie was known for her kind, gentle, and sweet nature, which made her a favorite among those who knew her. Lizzie's aunt recalled that whenever Lizzie came home, she'd exclaim, "I'm home," and it filled their hearts with joy. Lizzie was thriving in her new life, with new opportunities opening up in her free time. She had found a job at Target, where she quickly fit in and earned respect from her colleagues. That's where she met Kate McDonough, an 18-year-old who quickly became a close friend. They girls often hung out after work, and one day, Kate invited Lizzie over to her apartment. On subsequent invitations, Lizzie was happy to accept. Lizzie and Kate planned a cozy evening with dinner and a movie on October 9th. However, Kate's boyfriend Seth joined them, bringing a lively atmosphere. Seth was a man of many talents, with a theater arts background and a black belt in karate. Lizzie's family and friends expected a fun evening together. When she failed to return home at the agreed-upon time, her relatives initially thought she might have stayed overnight at a friend's place and then headed to university. However, when she didn't show up the next day, her aunt and uncle grew concerned and contacted her parents, who were also unaware of her whereabouts. Lizzie's parents immediately drove to Chester, reporting their daughter's disappearance to the police along the way. The investigation began, and the police questioned everyone who knew Lizzie, but her relatives had no idea where she had gone. Fortunately, a friend named Nate revealed that he thought Lizzie might be with Kate McDonough. Nate asked Kate if she had seen Lizzie. Kate replied that she hadn't. Detectives began investigating the new information provided by Nate. In the meantime, they discovered that her bank accounts showed no activity and her phone was dead. This led them to rule out the initial theory that she might have been involved in an accident. Shortly after, her car was located. After interviewing her friends and coworkers, investigators gathered some information about Kate and her boyfriend, Seth. Lizzie and Kate's acquaintances have noticed they spending increasing amounts of time together, despite their vastly different personalities. Outwardly, Lizzie is sociable and compassionate, whereas Kate is known for being rude. The reason behind their close relationship remains unclear. Lizzie was once a cheerful person, but after meeting Seth, she changed. Her coworkers noticed a difference, and she distanced herself from relatives who disapproved of Seth's behavior. They started dating when Lizzie was 17 and moved in together in Dover, New Hampshire, after she turned 18. On October 12th, authorities questioned Kate and Seth separately, but at the same time. This tactic helped investigators gather more information. For 2 hours, Kate consistently denied ever having met Lizzie on October 9th, but then she stopped cooperating completely with the investigation. Seth, on the other hand, was more open with the details. He contradicted Kate's account, saying that Lizzie was actually at their place on the 9th. Seth described the events of that day, saying that he, Kate, and Lizzie watched a movie together, played strip poker, and then engaged in a consensual threesome. However, the situation becomes tragic when things don't go as planned. Lizzie accidentally dies while tied with rope. Too shocked and afraid of being misunderstood, Seth and Kate decided to dump Lizzie's body into the Piscataqua River on Pierce Island. After being questioned for 11 hours, Seth accompanied police to the location and reenacted how he and Kate threw the body off the cliff. Lizzie's parents doubted Seth's account of her death, insisting she was in a loving relationship with Brittany and wouldn't cheat or take her own life. They urged police to find her body for a proper burial. The search continued with volunteers and a detective, but strong river currents made it possible her body was swept to the Atlantic. The investigation into Lizzie's death continued with a search of Seth's apartment. Detectives found the apartment cluttered and disorganized, with evidence of Seth's interest in occultism and black magic. A search of the surrounding area turned up a bag in a trash container containing black leather gloves, a sweatshirt, and men's underwear with DNA from both Seth and Lizzie, confirming their intimate relationship. The sweatshirt was identified as Lizzie's by her family. Later, Kate McDonough confirmed some of his account. According to Kate, she, Seth, and Lizzie spent the evening of October 9th in playing strip poker, which eventually led to a consensual intimate encounter involving rope bondage, which Lizzie had agreed to. Lizzie Marriott was having a good time until she suddenly had a seizure, suffocated, and lost consciousness. She stopped breathing when Seth and Kate lifted her up. Kate thought it was an accident, but an unexpected witness's testimony took the investigation in a new direction. A young woman visited the police station, claiming to have crucial information about the Lizzie Marriott case and requesting to speak with the lead detectives. During the conversation, she introduced herself as Catherine Fish, Seth Mella's ex-girlfriend. Her statements implied that Seth was capable of murder. She revealed that Seth had once confided in her about a fantasy in which he took someone's life. To understand Catherine's testimony, it's essential to examine her past relationship with Seth. They met 10 years ago, and initially Seth seemed attentive and caring. However, during their first intimate encounter, Catherine discovered Seth's interest in BDSM. Seth initially seemed great, but he revealed a cruel and controlling side over time. He didn't tolerate disagreement or boundaries. After sharing dark fantasies, kind of felt trapped and scared, especially when Seth physically attacked her, grabbing her throat and refusing to let go despite her pleas. This incident shattered her illusions about their relationship. After moving to a new city, kind of felt isolated and alone, dependent on Seth. As his behavior escalated, he introduced other women, proposing a polyamorous relationship. Kind of felt trapped, afraid to leave due to Seth's controlling behavior. It took months for her to gather the courage to escape the toxic relationship. In May 2014, Seth Mella appeared in court, facing not only intentional murder charges, but also accusations of taking advantage of multiple individuals. Several people testified against him, including Kate McDonough. 2 months after Lizzie's death, Kate was arrested and held in custody on charges of obstructing justice and interfering with the investigation. During her time in custody, Kate had ample opportunity to reflect on the events and consider who she was protecting. While imprisoned, Kate and Seth stayed in close touch and envisioned a life together in a country where they could not be extradited. They shared dreams of getting married, starting a family, and building a future, but their escape plan stalled in the winter of 2012. Seth convinced his cellmate, Ryan Bachman, who was about to be released, to help their escape. The plan was for Ryan to use his bank account to withdraw money, buy drugs, and sell them to increase their initial investment. They intended to use the money to purchase guns, 2 cars, explosives, and a boat. Ryan had different intentions and chose to keep the money for himself, causing Seth to give up on their plan to escape. Meanwhile, authorities became aware of their scheme. Seth wrote to Kate and hinted at a reunion in the afterlife, suggesting he believed in its existence. This could imply that Seth was vaguely suggesting Kate should consider ending her life to join him in the afterlife. As time passed, Kate's thoughts became clearer, allowing her to make a more rational decision when the prosecutor's office presented her with a favorable deal in 2014. Under the agreement, Kate was required to reveal the truth about the events that occurred on the evening of October 9th, and in return, her potential 20-year prison sentence was significantly reduced to 3 years. This offer was especially beneficial in light of the circumstances that later came to light during the investigation. As part of their agreement, Kate acknowledged that she was deeply intimidated by Seth and followed his instructions without hesitation. Over time, Seth had slowly stripped Kate of her autonomy and stifled her ability to make decisions for herself. Approximately 6 weeks before the tragic event, Seth had asked Kate to arrange a threesome with someone else while she was away on a 10-day theater tour, but Kate was unable to find someone to participate. Over time, Seth's messages to Kate became increasingly aggressive, transitioning from giving her instructions to making threats. He warned her of severe consequences if she didn't meet his demands, which included bringing a friend to participate in his plan. Kate invited Lizzie to visit her at home, and Lizzie agreed because she trusted Kate and had been to her place before. However, Kate didn't tell Lizzie that Seth would also be there, as she knew Lizzie might be hesitant. Seth had seen Lizzie's photos and was eager to meet her. On October 9th, Seth arrived at Kate's apartment at 9 p.m. At first, Kate and Lizzie chatted together, and Seth joined in later, initially creating a light-hearted atmosphere with his jokes and friendly demeanor. As they watched a movie, Seth suggested playing strip poker, dimming the lights to create an intimate setting. Lizzie began to lose the game, eventually ending up in her underwear. In another round, Seth suggested kissing Kate, but she refused, explaining that she was in a committed relationship and found the idea unpleasant. Seth suggested leaving Lizzie alone, but she refused. He retrieved a rope and gloves from his room, returned, and strangled her with the rope before she could react. After killing Lizzie, Seth committed a further act of violence against her body. His girlfriend, Kate, was present but did not intervene, claiming she was too scared to act. She feared that she would become the next victim if she tried to help. Later, at around 1 a.m., Seth and his girlfriend wrapped Lizzie's body in tarpaulin and placed it in a suitcase. They then transported the suitcase to Lizzie's car and drove to Pierce Island by the river. From the observation deck, they removed Lizzie's body from the suitcase and threw it off the cliff. After the incident, Kate and another person cleaned up inside her car. Then they drove to the campus parking lot, where Kate parked her vehicle. From the parking lot, they walked a 10-mile distance to Kate's home. The experience left Kate severely shaken, and she went into shock. She was also fearful of testifying against Seth in the future, worrying that he might intimidate or silence her due to concerns for her safety. During the trial, Kate's excessive sobbing raised suspicions, with some doubting her emotional display and suggesting she was a skilled actress. Kate's defense claimed that Lizzie's death was an accident during intimacy, but acknowledged that Seth and Kate had disposed of the body. They alleged that Seth isolated and coerced Kate, affecting her mental state. The prosecution focused on deliberate murder, citing the discovery of gloves at the scene, which suggested premeditation. Roberta Gherkin and Paul Hickok, acquaintances of Seth Mella, testified for the prosecution. After Lizzie's murder, Seth called them at 10:49 p.m. asking for help. When they arrived after 11 p.m., they found Seth on the bed next to Kate McDonough in lingerie. Seth said, "This time things went too far." Roberta found Kate in the kitchen and suggested calling an ambulance. They chose not to intervene or contact police, avoiding involvement. Seth Mella was convicted of first-degree murder by strangulation and conspiracy in 2014, receiving a life sentence without parole. Kate McDonough, who was 20 at the time, got a 3-year sentence as part of a plea deal and was released in 2016. She has since maintained a low profile. Lizzie Marriott's parents, Bob and Melissa, do not feel the sentence is sufficient. They hope her case can serve as a warning to others, especially women. They created a memorial bench in her hometown, since her body was never recovered. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Blake Leibel was born in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on the 8th of May in 1981. His family was a well-off family right up the tree. His father, Lorne Leibel, is a well-known real estate tycoon and Canadian Motorsport Hall of Famer, while Blake's mother, Eleanor Chettle, inherited Alros products from her father, Paul Chettle. This company makes plastic polytart materials and is reported to generate over $28 million in sales annually. But while grandfather Paul Chettle was a success, it was reported that he was known to be a control freak and bully. Paul's wife, Blake's grandmother, suffered from a severe mental illness of some kind. The specific diagnosis remains unknown, but what is known is that when Paul Chettle passed away, he left a will behind that withheld inheritance from his family, pending not only alcohol and drug screening, but also an HIV test. Once relatives successfully passed these stipulations, Paul Chettle's girlfriend would get 2 Mercedes-Benz cars, a Cadillac, and some other parting gifts, while Blake's mother got a payout of $12 million. Oddly enough, Blake's brother, Cody Leibel, was cut out of the will, with Paul Chettle stating that it wasn't out of lack of love, but rather that he knew Cody's father would adequately provide for him. On the other side of the family, Blake and Cody's father, Lorne Leibel, was a man who dated beautiful young women and took them out in fancy Ferraris. He was the envy of any man who set eyes on his fortunes or female companions. When Lorne Libel split up with Eleanor Chettle, Blake lived with his mom, while Cody lived with his dad. It was during this time that Blake and his father reportedly became distant and estranged, as Blake felt that Lorne wasn't providing enough for him financially. Even so, the Libel family was, by all accounts, a highly successful one. Even Blake's grandfather, Stanley Libel, was a well-known sailor who competed in the 1968 Summer Olympics, and then later developed hundreds of homes across Toronto. Even Blake's aunt, Terry Libel, is a Canadian journalist who served as a host for CBC's Olympic coverage during the 1996, 2002, 2004, and 2006 games. Blake and his brother, Cody Libel, were destined for success right from the very start. Or at least they certainly had the financial environment around them to allow them to succeed at whatever they put their minds to. As a matter of fact, when Cody Libel moved to California, he certainly left his mark of success on the world. He even sold his 5,500 square foot home in Beverly Crest for almost $18 million in 2017. The buyer was reportedly Katy Perry. Then later on the same year, Cody bought Reba McEntire's house for a reported $25 million, crowning him the youngest homeowner in Beverly Park history. This move made him neighbors with big names like Sylvester Stallone, Mark Wahlberg, Denzel Washington, and even Eddie Murphy. As the world's youngest owner of a Ferrari Enzo, Cody not only owned a record label, but he was a regular at a poker club called Molly's Game that reportedly hosted famous faces like Leonardo DiCaprio, Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, and Tobey Maguire. Cody Libel certainly seemed as successful as the family that raised him. Cody's brother, Blake Libel, moved to California in 2004. He reportedly still received an allowance from his mother that totaled close to $2 million in just 8 years. In 2011, Blake's mother Eleanor would die of brain cancer, leaving a huge inheritance behind to Blake and Cody. Roughly 2 years later, Blake challenged his mother's will to remove his father as trustee and deny his brother Cody his inheritance. But Blake, who reportedly didn't even attend his mother's funeral, received little sympathy from the courts. But who is Blake Libel? He wrote and directed a comedy film in 2009 called Bold. It was very low budget, and it didn't hit well at all. The movie was a massive flop with a 2.6-star rating on IMDb. But apparently you can still find it on Plex TV if you're curious. Blake Libel also directed a 2013 film called Soulmates. He's even listed as a creative consultant and director on a few episodes of Mel Brooks' Spaceballs, The Animate. In 2010, Blake published a graphic novel called Syndrome. The novel was about a man named Dr. Chattel, who happens to share the same name as Blake's own mother. In the novel, Dr. Chattel studies serial killers. He also goes as far as to recruit a town full of actors, and then set up a fake Truman Show-style scenario. Next, he fakes the execution of a serial killer before wiping his mind, and allowing the memoryless man to run free in the fake town so Chattel can monitor his actions. The doctor's goal in the book is to cure serial killers. Chattel's character can be quoted saying that evil is not some mysterious force, evil is a syndrome. Co-author of the book, Ryan Roberts, stated that Blake told him that he had done a lot of research on serial killers. Ryan also recalled how Libel jerked his hands upward when showing how a victim could be flipped upside down in order to drain them of fluid. In hindsight, Ryan Roberts said he'll never forget that. While Blake didn't actually write or illustrate the final edition of Syndrome, he was credited as creator of the book. And he wrote an introduction at the start of the novel, asking the question, if you loved hurting things, what would you do? Syndrome, Blake's biggest success, and it ended up with him giving away stacks of the graphic novels for free at Comic-Con in San Diego. A producer said Blake wanted to be a respected comic book artist, and he used his cash to try and buy that image. He tried hard to come across as cool and edgy, but it was clear to everyone that Blake Libel had some serious mental issues that he needed to address. His mental state had begun to deteriorate, and he was spiraling into a dark abyss. Those close to him had started to recognize the signs, but none could foresee the depths to which Blake would ultimately sink until it was beyond anyone's reach to save him. Blake Libel had quite the romantic life. In 2006, Blake met a Californian model named Amanda Braun. Amanda was previously in a relationship with Andrew Alchek, who died in prison following convictions for crimes committed as a crooked hedge fund manager. After 5 years of dating, Blake and Amanda finally tied the knot in 2011. Not long after the wedding, Amanda Braun Libel gave birth to a son. While the couple appeared to live comfortably in their Beverly Hills mansion, Blake continued to cash in and spend his checks pretty much as quickly as he received them. He reportedly smoked weed constantly and came up with various plans for success, but none of his ideas proved fruitful. During this time, one of Libel's friends said Blake was developing a dark obsession with brutal violence. It was like Blake was becoming a different person. He was distant and paranoid. Then in the summer of 2015, Blake left Amanda while she was pregnant with their second child. This was reportedly due to his pot-smoking habit consuming his life. But I'd say there was more than a marijuana issue brewing. Blake began isolating from almost everyone as he sank deeper into a world filled with gore, violence, and darkness. He even stopped returning his family's calls and began to suspect that his brother Cody was in deep debt to some Russian gang members, and he was worried it could potentially bring harm back his way. But there was never any evidence that Cody Libel owed any major debt like that, and no one could understand why Blake's sanity was spiraling out of control. But most of his friends claimed it was initially the death of his mother that brought on this dark madness. Eleanor Chattel's $5.5 million home in Toronto, plus the millions of other dollars acquired due to her death, just wasn't enough for Blake. He was broke, and when he failed to have his mother's will overturned in 2013, he turned to his father to help him pay for his mounting credit card debts. Then Blake was sued by his lawyers for non-payment in the unsuccessful case of Eleanor Chattel's will. After Blake split up with Amanda, he began pitching another original script called Psychopomp. It was about a caped vigilante that cuts off the heads of villains and then uploads his antics to YouTube. But reviewers of the script stated that it was terrible in every way possible. There wasn't one thing about Blake Libel's new project that anyone liked. It was likened to a bad rip-off version of Batman, where Batman is violent, psychotic, stupid, sadistic, and highly unlikable. Psychopomp was nothing more than a gratuitously violent film devoid of any imaginative flair. However, there were whispers that Hilary Shore, a producer involved in Children of Men, had expressed interest in the Psychopomp screenplay. Yet, this supposed development never materialized. While married to a pregnant Amanda Braun, Blake had started seeing Yana Kashin, a stunning 30-year-old Ukrainian former attorney from Kiev. In no time, Blake got her pregnant too, and for a while, they seemed happy and healthy as Blake pulled Yana into his fantasy world of Hollywood hot pink. All the while, his mental decline was picking up speed at a volatile pace. In May of 2016, Yana gave birth to a baby girl named Diana, and to outside observers, the new family appeared to be doing well. However, the reality was far from idyllic. Blake harbored intense jealousy towards the infant, as a storm of anger raged within him. No longer the sole object of Yana's affection, Blake found himself replaced by baby Diana, pushing him to new heights of psychological instability. He incessantly demanded sexual attention from Yana, threatening to abandon her for another woman if she refused his advances. In an attempt to salvage their relationship, Yana sent her newborn daughter to live with her mother in a nearby apartment, which Blake financially supported. Then on the 20th of May, Blake Libel was arrested for sexual assault, not far from his condo. The alleged victim was Blake's third girlfriend, Constance Bucafori. She'd been living in another house he owned that was also a couple of miles away from his West Hollywood apartment, where he lived with Yana. Constance claimed Blake forced himself on her in the house. Bucafori is known for being a storyboard artist on Aquaman, and working in the art department for films like Snow White and The Huntsman P.S. I Love You and the Emoji Movie. Blake Libel was released from custody around 15 hours after he was arrested, following a bail payment of $100,000. Yana had bailed Blake out of jail, but finding out about the affair with Constance was the final straw for her. She moved into her mother, Olga Kasiansma. There was only one door left to check, and it was locked. The cops tried to force the door open to the bedroom, but a mattress was barricading the door from the other side. The cops shouted for whoever was in there to come out, and that's when Blake's voice finally responded, saying he wasn't going to come out because he was scared that the officers were going to beat him up. They assured him that this wouldn't happen, and that they were just there to check on his girlfriend to make sure she was okay. Blake replied back that she was fine. He said she was at the hospital and gave them a room number. He also said that his father would be there soon, and that he wasn't coming out until then. Blake was referring to his accountant and mentor, Stephen Green. Blake had called Stephen around noon and asked him to come to the apartment. For a month before Stephen Green received that call, he had been unable to get in contact with Blake Libel. Green had called, messaged, left voicemails, and even emailed Blake several times, but he never got a reply. Stephen Green even left a voicemail on Blake's phone stating that he was worried about him and that he loved him. He said whatever was going on, he wanted to help him get through it. But as you're about to find out, it was way too late for that. When Green arrived at the condo, he spoke to Blake through the partially opened bedroom door in the apartment. A short while later, a detective arrived on the scene to find Green now in the living room talking to Blake on the phone. Leibel was still barricaded in the master bedroom. When Green hung up the phone, the detective asked him to call Blake back, which he did. After a few minutes of conversation, Blake Leibel finally agreed to come out. He was only wearing boxer shorts when he emerged from the room. Stephen Green gave Blake some clothing to put on. Luckily, officers checked the clothing first and found Leibel's passport and about $4,000 in cash. It's thought that he was going to try and make a break for it, but that never happened. As the officers entered the bedroom, one of them screamed, "She's on the bed." The detective immediately ordered everyone to go outside, and he called in the paramedics who were waiting on standby. Sadly, Yana Cashin was pronounced dead at 1:02 p.m. on May 26th. Yana Cashin's naked body was lying on a clean sheet and was covered by a red Mickey Mouse blanket on top of a blue polka dot blanket. Her head was on a pillow. There were abrasions and bruising on the left side of Cashin's face, consistent with blunt force trauma. There were human bite marks on Cashin's left jaw and left bicep, as well as fingernail marks under her jawline. Her scalp had been removed from around her eyebrows to the hairline on the back of her head. A large portion of skin on the right side of her face had also been removed. The skull bone was visible. There were cuts across her lower forehead, below the eyebrows. There was also a cut on the right side of her face, from her cheek to her jawline, and another on the left side of her face, toward where the ear should have been, but it was missing. The medical examiner later proposed that a sharp-bladed tool had been used to cut off the skin, but he also noted that some facial tissue had been ripped away by hand. Considering the extensive damage to Jana's face and skull, combined with the challenging nature of both cutting and tearing the tissue, the doctor believed that inflicting these injuries would have been a lengthy process. Moreover, the presence of inflammation in the tissue and bleeding from several severed samples led to the tragic conclusion that Jana Cashin was still alive while enduring this prolonged torture. The examiner also determined that there was no blood in Jana's heart, veins, or arteries. Half of Jana's blood supply was missing. This is highly unusual, even considering the weight of her injuries. Gravity wouldn't have been enough to drain that much blood from her body. Her heart would have had to have been pumping the entire time. It was the medical examiner's opinion that Blake may have drained Jana's blood by placing her in the bathtub with her head lower than her feet, and then running water over her head, which could have increased the blood flow and potentially interfere with clotting. Due to the presence of foam in her nostrils, the doctor concluded that Jana was probably submerged in water for at least 30 minutes. Her body was then washed and placed on the clean sheet. Her cause of death was ruled as exsanguination, which is the draining of blood. There was an additional pillow to the left of Jana with an indentation on it. It was as if someone had been laying next to her. There were dried blood stains on the mattress beneath the sheet she lay upon. The investigation uncovered the extent of the violence that had occurred throughout Blake Leibel's condo. According to court documents, blood stains and pieces of human flesh were discovered behind the bed. Blood was also splattered on the wall near Jana's body. A fragment of an eyebrow was found on the floor beside the bed. In addition to the mattress Jana was lying on, blood stains were present on another mattress from a second bed in the room, as well as on a side table and in various other areas of the bedroom. The mattress that had been used to obstruct the door belonged to this second bed. A clump of hair and a blood-stained razor were found in the trash can. When cops entered the bathroom of the master bedroom, warm water was running in the bathtub. Blood stains and hair could be seen in the tub. A green paring knife with blood on it was found in the top drawer in the bathroom. The oval shape of the blood stains found on the headboard of the bed and the guest bedroom were consistent with having been made via the top of Jana's scalped head. There was blood on 2 towels, a pillowcase, the floor, and the base of the drapes in the guest bedroom. The drain in the tub of the guest bathroom also tested positive for blood. The same drain contained some freshly cut hair. Chemical testing also confirmed the presence of blood that someone had tried to clean up in areas of the dining room, the hallway, the guest bathroom, and both of the bedrooms. The kitchen garbage disposal also tested positive for blood. Then more evidence was found in the dumpster. Inside trash bags that had been thrown down the garbage chute, mere feet from Blake's condo door, Investigators found blood-stained bedding, towels, clothing, bath mats, placemats, a bed skirt with bloody handprints, human tissue, including some pieces with hair that appeared to be scalp and the missing ear. Samples taken from Blake's hand and fingernails also contained Jana's DNA. Jana's hands showed signs of injury consistent with self-defense. The marks and bruises seen on Blake's face when arrested were most likely inflicted by Jana, fighting for her life. The LA coroner concluded that she was kept alive for around 8 hours. He said he'd never seen injuries like that, and he likened them to wartime injuries. Blake Leibel was arrested and charged with the torture and murder of Jana Cashin. It was later discovered that he used her phone to order food to the apartment via Postmates twice during the time Jana was missing. Blake's demeanor on the scene was described as ice cold. He acted as if he didn't even know Jana was dead. When an officer told him, he simply replied, "Well, I guess you'll find out who did it then." Leibel donned an evil grin as officers led him away from the condo in handcuffs. On June 26, 2018, Blake Leibel was sentenced to life without parole. Due to the nature of his crimes, he was eligible for the death penalty, but the DA didn't pursue it, even though doctors deemed Blake not to be insane and stated he was fit to stand trial. It took the jury just 3 hours to deliver a guilty verdict. Blake was also ordered to pay about $43 million to Jana Cashin's family. Cody Leibel was present on every day of the trial. Blake's father never showed up. Jana Cashin had only been living in the United States for a couple of years before tragedy struck. She was working on becoming a translator. What happened to her was absolutely devastating. It was a crime with little motive outside of Blake's narcissistic desire to control women with his allowance. It was as if this aged, evil little boy had never been rejected. And once he was, or rather felt like he couldn't take it. His ego collapsed, and he snatched away the life of his newborn daughter's beautiful mother in the cruelest way possible. Blake Leibel will rot in prison where he belongs, alone with no one, nothing, and no future that will lead to any shedding of light in his direction. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Siobhan McLaughlin. On February 28, 2006, McLaughlin was found deceased in a locked bedroom at her residence in Natchitoches Goldstown, Dublin 14. At first, it appeared as if she had tragically taken her own life. But within hours, the members of the McLaughlin family were convinced that she had been brutally murdered. Siobhan was one of 8 children, 7 girls and 1 boy, born to her parents, Ewan and Deja McLaughlin. Siobhan worked as a chef in the canteen of an electrical firm. In 1989, at the age of 21, she met a man named Brian Carney, who was 31 years old. Brian worked as an electrical engineer for the same firm, which was a very good job. Siobhan lived in an apartment, while Brian lived with his toddler daughter, Aisling, from a previous relationship. Brian's wife and the mother of his child had passed away from natural causes a few years before Siobhan and him met. Brian was raising his daughter alone. Eventually, Siobhan would move in with Brian and his daughter. They renovated this house and then decided to sell it. Siobhan decided to set up her own catering business, as she had trained at the Shelburne Hotel, and she was ahead of her time when it came to food. She used ingredients that were uncommon in Ireland during the 90s, but would now be considered standard. The era of meat and potatoes had passed. Brian was not only an electrical engineer, but he also owned a music shop called Music City, which he sold in 2005. In 1995, the couple got engaged but then split up. They did keep in touch with each other over the years, meeting for dinner every few months. While they were separated, Brian never entered into any other relationship, and eventually they reconciled. In January 2002, they got married and Siobhan was expecting a baby. Their son, Daniel, was born 6 months later. That same year, Brian and Siobhan traveled to Spain on holidays, with the prospect of buying a boat. But while there, they came across a 200-year-old merchant's mansion on the island of Mallorca in Spain. They bought it and converted it into a boutique hotel. It had 6 luxury bedrooms and a heated outdoor pool. The couple bought the property for €2.5 million and oversaw most of the renovations themselves. Siobhan was a visionary, traveling from place to place, collecting pieces for the hotel, along with her impeccable taste and furnishings. Siobhan's culinary skills were what would make the hotel a success. The hotel opened in January 2003, and Siobhan's barbecues quickly became a highlight of guest stays and were popular among the locals. Siobhan and Brian would regularly travel back and forth between Mallorca and Ireland. However, during the holiday season, which spanned from March to December, Brian would travel back to Ireland more frequently. This meant that Siobhan was left in charge of running the business in Mallorca, while also raising their son, Daniel. Later, people who knew Siobhan would say that towards the end, they could see that she was not happy and was exhausted from doing everything. They felt there was an atmosphere of tension when Brian was around. However, because Siobhan's family was so large, Siobhan would frequently receive visits from one or a few of them, and she was very glad to see them. These visits seemed to lift her spirits and put a pep in her step. Siobhan was very independent, but she also greatly valued the closeness of her family. A few years into owning the property in Spain, Brian and Siobhan decided to build a new house beside their property in Dublin, hoping to sell the original house and move into the new house or rent out either of the properties. Siobhan came home to Dublin for the break. In 2006, she consulted a lawyer about legally separating and what she had to do. The solicitor advised her to keep a diary of the goings-on between herself and Brian. She enrolled their son, Daniel, in a local school and was going to approach Brian about her and their son moving into the new house that was being built next door. While Siobhan loved what she had built out there, she was very much on her own, overworked, and trying to raise their son with no family around her for support. On the morning of Tuesday, the 28th of February, 2006, it was Brian's birthday. Siobhan's sister Niamh arrived at Siobhan's house as usual. While she normally arrived at 9 a.m. to leave her car in the driveway and catch the bus into the city, this morning, she did not arrive until 9:30 a.m. As she had her own key, she let herself into the house and found 3-year-old Daniel wandering around on his own downstairs. Niamh then went upstairs to Siobhan's bedroom door and found it was locked. There was no reply when she called her name. Niamh then called her father and mother and informed them of the situation. When the father arrived, he broke down the door and found Siobhan lying in the bedroom near the inset door. Owen reached down and touched Siobhan on the head and then the leg and found she was cold. He knew then that his beloved daughter was dead. She was only 38 years old. The key to the bedroom was found on the floor, just inches away from the main bedroom door, and it appeared to have been pushed under. Owen immediately contacted the Garda, Irish police. When they arrived and examined the scene, they felt it was staged. Photos had been placed around Siobhan, almost like a shrine. A cord was partially wrapped around Siobhan, and the cord had been broken. When the forensic team arrived and examined the scene, they found indentations at the top of the end-soot door, and the other part of the vacuum cord was wrapped around the door handle on the inside of the door, making it look like she had tried to hang herself. It later emerged in court that the cord would have snapped within 5 seconds due to Siobhan's weight, and she would have had to have been at least 6 inches off the ground. These two factors, combined with other evidence, indicated that it was impossible for Siobhan to have taken her own life. It was also determined that Siobhan had been dead for a few hours as rigor mortis had already set in. The Garda imposed a 2-day media blackout on the case and advised the family not to speak to the press. After Siobhan's killing, it was said that the Garda took this step to try and avoid publicity of the case and to prevent a repeat of what had happened in the Rachel O'Reilly case 18 months earlier, where no charges had yet been brought. The blackout was lifted when Brian's mother-in-law informed him of Siobhan's passing. The McLaughlin family gathered, united in grief, while Brian received little sympathy, his sister offering consolation. The family referred to Siobhan by her maiden name, evidently privy to information unknown to others. Brian was extensively questioned. Could he leave, only to be told he had to speak to the detectives first? He also questioned whether they would want the clothes he was wearing, which was strange. Brian was eventually allowed to leave after speaking with the detectives, and he did not hand over the clothes for testing, as he had asked for a specific item of clothing from the back bedroom to change into. The police officers did not want to give him these clothes, so they let him leave with the clothes he was wearing. He went to stay with his parents, along with Daniel. Later that evening, Gwadi went to the house to retrieve the clothes he was wearing, and it was discovered that his mother had washed the clothes. Very convenient. On Thursday, March 2nd, 49-year-old Brown was brought in for questioning and detained for 12 hours. Reports indicate he was picked up from his parents' home. After initially agreeing to cooperate with the investigation, he refused to answer any of the questions asked. He was released that evening. Gwadi told the press that they were conducting further inquiries, and a file would be prepared for the Director of Public Prosecutions. The Gwadi interviewed Siobhan's friends and family, and they discovered that Siobhan was unhappy in her marriage and had visited a solicitor weeks before she died. She had also contacted the Citizens Advice Bureau for advice on separation and dividing assets. The family also revealed that they were suspicious of Brian and that he was a controlling individual. They provided an example of Siobhan being made to take out the dishes from the dishwasher and being required to wash them by hand because it was too expensive to run the dishwasher. He controlled the money, and she had to get his approval for everything. Siobhan sold her apartment, and Brian moved them to Spain. One of the sisters would say it was his dream to move to Spain, not Siobhan's. Siobhan's life was in Ireland, and she had no one in Spain. It was his way of isolating her from her friends and family. There was also a growing rift between Brian and the McLaughlin family. Brian delayed the funeral by 10 days after asking for a second autopsy. When a death notice was published in the newspaper, the McLaughlin family referred to Siobhan as McLaughlin and not Carney, and never mentioned Brian. Meanwhile, they published a separate notice in a different newspaper. At the funeral on the 11th of March, a picture was placed beside the coffin of Siobhan and her son, but Brian was left out. Additionally, at the funeral, the Kearney and McLaughlin families sat separately in the church. They did not look at each other or interact on the day. This is characteristic of Irish people. We do not hesitate to express our genuine feelings about someone. The week after the funeral, the Garda traveled to Spain and conducted a search of the hotel that Siobhan and Brian owned. Furthermore, Brian's mobile data was recovered, and it placed him at the scene of the crime at the time they believed Siobhan died. Witnesses reported seeing Brian in the driveway at the time. He claimed to be at his brother's on the morning of the murder. Brian's DNA was also found on a part of the vacuum cord. On June 22, 2006, Brian was arrested again and questioned at Dundrum Garda Station. He was questioned for 8 hours before being released without charge. The Garda felt they had enough evidence at this stage and sent a complete file with all the new evidence gathered over the months to the Director of Public Prosecutions, DPP. It was now a waiting game. Meanwhile, Brian went to Spain to oversee all the preparations for the hotel's new season opening. However, once word spread about the murder, cancellations started coming in and staff also quit considering it too difficult to work without Siobhan, who was the backbone of the business's success. The staff's loyalty was to Siobhan, not Brian, which reflects the kind of person Siobhan was. The Guardia again returned to the hotel in Spain, and under oath in front of a Spanish judge, the staff gave evidence about Siobhan's demeanor in the weeks before her death. On December 10, 2006, Siobhan's family held a vigil outside her house where she was killed. Her sister said, "We are utterly distraught without Siobhan, but we are equally determined and will not rest until her killer is brought to justice." Siobhan was the embodiment of fun, life, joy, a terrific mother, and an adorable and hilarious sister and daughter, a true friend, and she will never be forgotten. 200 people turned up at the vigil. They held hands, sang hymns, and held up pictures of Siobhan. In January 2007, the newspapers once again spoke to Guardi's sources, and they said they were confident that an arrest would be made soon. However, the amount of evidence was substantial, and it would take time to go through it. On Tuesday, the 17th of January, 2007, the inquest into Siobhan's death was postponed. The McLaughlin family appealed to the public for fresh information to convict the main suspect, Brian, as the Director of Public Prosecutions announced they needed even more evidence to go for a conviction of murder against Brian. Brian did not attend the short hearing. On May 30th, 2007, Kearney was arrested at his home next to his original home with his kids. He was charged with Siobhan's murder, brought to court, and remanded to prison. His response was not guilty, and no bail request was made. The McLaughlin family attended the hearing, but Kearney avoided eye contact and chewed gum disrespectfully. Kearney was freed on bail on June 6, 2007 after appealing to the High Court at Clover Hill Prison the previous day. His release came with conditions. He had to surrender his passport, pay €100 and provide a €55,000 bond from an independent juror, which his brother Patrick supplied. He also had to sign in weekly at Dundrum Garda Station. In July, a date was set for the trial to begin 6 months later with a 4-week time frame to hear all evidence and reach a verdict. So the trial was to start in early 2008. On February 11th, Kearney appeared for trial before Justice Barry White and a jury of 12. He pleaded not guilty. However, one juror worked for a home security company that had installed and serviced the Kearney residence system. While the defense was willing to continue with 11 jurors, the prosecution objected and the judge agreed. The jury was dismissed and a new one sworn in a week later. It was the prosecution's case that Kearney had murdered Siobhan, tried to stage it as a suicide, and left his son alone before going to work. The McLaughlin family testified about the events, and Siobhan's father found her dead. Her mother also recounted the morning's happenings, including Neve's wrong actions towards the authorities and Kearney. She said when Kearney arrived home, she broke the news to him that Siobhan was dead upstairs. When she had been on the phone with him, she had not told him what was wrong, and Kearney never asked. Deja also confirmed that in 1999, Siobhan had signed herself into the St. John of God's psychiatric unit after suffering from stress at work and what was described as a little breakdown. But after 5 days, she returned to work. Bridget, Siobhan's sister, stated that in 2005, Kearney phoned her to say that Siobhan was suffering from her nerves again, but when Bridget phoned Siobhan, she was perfectly fine. Ward, who worked for Colors Electrical with Kearney, said Kearney was in the habit of arriving to work between 8:30 a.m. and 9 a.m., but on the morning of Siobhan's murder, he arrived extra early, between 7:50 a.m. and 8 a.m. A solicitor confirmed that multiple letters regarding the separation had been sent to Kearney, but he never responded to any of the correspondence. Kearney's statement to the guards was then read aloud. Kearney told the securities guards that on the morning of Siobhan's death, he had noticed her door was locked. The previous night, Siobhan and Daniel had returned home from a visit to her friend's house around 8:30 p.m., and Kearney had put Daniel to bed and slept in the same room, while Siobhan slept in the master bedroom. Kearney had said they woke up at 7 a.m. the next morning, had breakfast, and Kearney put on a DVD for Daniel, went upstairs to brush his teeth, and then attempted to enter Siobhan's room, but it was locked. He called out that he was leaving, went downstairs, kissed Daniel goodbye, and left for work. The court adjourned when a juror fell ill, but returned the next day. Evidence showed Siobhan couldn't have hanged herself. The pathologist found marks on her neck and chin, 3 larynx fractures, blood, and chin abrasions. She said the neck marks didn't come from hanging. Significant force was applied and Siobhan was assaulted in bed, gripped by the neck, and a ligature used to hasten her death. The security guards reported no signs of forced entry, as the house's windows and doors were in good working condition. The alarm company confirmed that the system was activated at 10:50 p.m. the previous night, and then immediately deactivated, and it was reactivated at 7:37 a.m. the next morning before being turned off again. A thorough search of the Kearney residence uncovered a diary in the airing cupboard, and the writing inside was confirmed to be Siobhan's by her sister. Siobhan's solicitor had advised her to maintain a diary documenting the events of her marriage to Kearney. Additionally, Siobhan's passport was found wrapped in sheets and clothing in another area, and a €500 note was discovered in a drawer among wrapping paper. A financial forensic agent was next to take the stand. Kearney did own properties in Ireland and had a stake in the electrical business, plus the hotel, but while he was asset-rich, he was cash-poor. On Monday, the 3rd of March, closing arguments began. The defense were first, and they said the prospect of splitting with Siobhan did not suit Kearney financially. He wanted to sell one of the houses at Knocknashie, but if Siobhan wanted to move into one of them, this would not be an option, and Kearney would have to work out his debt. In some other way, the fact that Siobhan had started to squirrel away money, hide her passport, keep a diary of her relationship with Kearney, and send solicitor letters showed her seriousness about leaving him. Siobhan was looking forward to her future and making plans, which showed that she was not suicidal. The evidence shown by forensics also showed that it was next to impossible that she had taken her own life. Kearney even admitted that he, Siobhan, and their son had been the only ones present that night. The defense recommended caution, as the prosecution had shown no hard evidence, and it was all circumstantial evidence. They said the jury needed to pay attention to what was missing in the case. There was no history of violence, no custody dispute, no alcohol abuse or jealousy. The jury was asked to ignore the emotions of the McLaughlin family when they were giving evidence. It is known that there doesn't have to be outward signs of abuse, as it's the rabbit hole of a course of control, which the family would say there was plenty of. Siobhan was strangled, and she had known Kearney since a very young age. There were no visible signs of physical violence, but there were extreme levels of control, like Kearney telling her to take the dirty dishes out of the dishwasher and hand wash them, because it would cost too much money. When Siobhan finally said she was going to a solicitor, that's when Kearney couldn't cope, and he took her life. Coercive control is considered a form of domestic abuse, even if there is no physical violence. This is a growing issue that we are only now starting to address in the 2020s. On the 4th of March, Justice Barry White charged the jury and referred to the victim as Rachel, rather than Siobhan, in his summing up, which was a terrible mistake. It so happened that at the same time he was overseeing the case of Rachel O'Reilly, and he apologized. It wasn't the first or the last time that both women would be mentioned in each other's trial, as they both had died within 18 months of each other under similar circumstances. The jury was discharged that evening, and the following evening they came back with the verdict of guilty of murder by a majority verdict of 11-1. The McLaughlins wept and hugged each other as the verdict sunk in. Kearney made no reaction, but his daughter, who sat next to him, wept. And Kearney took his wedding ring off and took his wallet out and handed them to her. Kearney was sentenced to life there and then, and the McLaughlins asked to give a victim imprisonment given a 2-year sentence and a 3-year impact statement, but this was denied, which I don't understand why. Kearney was escorted to a van and brought to Whitfield Prison to start his sentence. Kearney lodged an appeal straight away, and it was heard in 2009, and the 3-judge panel dismissed the appeal. In 2012, Kearney was refused permission to bring his appeal to the Supreme Court. 7 years later, in 2019, Kearney's applications for parole were refused on 2 occasions. Kearney's sister told her local radio news network that the parole board had recommended Kearney for 2 outside prison visits with his family, suggesting they were preparing him for release. However, the parole board will only recommend his release if he admits his guilt, which he has never done. As of 2022, although the Minister for Justice has the final say on any release, Kearney remains incarcerated. In prison, Kearney is a trained counselor to help other inmates with their mental health and works for the organization The Samaritans. He is also trained in first aid. While in prison, he decided to sell the hotel in Spain, but then took it off the market in 2010. The hotel was then run by his brother Patrick and his wife, and it is still open, although it may be under new ownership since then. Kearney said he wanted to keep the hotel in order to facilitate his son's education. The McLaughlin family sought to adopt Daniel, but it's unclear whether they did or how he is doing, which is good, as he deserves some peace, as does his half-sister Aisling. A family with 3 children lived in the house where Siobhan was murdered, but it was up for sale for €1.4 million back in 2008. It's presumed that it has been sold since then. Kearney's daughter did live in the new house while he was still a free man, but there have been no updates on her either. If Kearney decided to sell off all his assets and pay off his debts, he will have a significant amount of money when he gets out, and he may even become a millionaire. The family were considering suing him for Siobhan's share at least, if not all, but there are no public details on this. Siobhan's sister Aisling released a statement after Kearney's conviction, saying that while their lives were utterly destroyed by Siobhan's death, Siobhan had now got justice. They are grateful to have known, and had someone as special as Shawnee in their lives, which was their nickname for her. However, they miss her every hour of every day, and the unbearable longing to see her and protect her never leaves them, even though they know it's too late. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Lindsay Wilson. In the spring of 1999, the community of Southport in the United Kingdom was divided into 2 camps. The media and television were filled with numerous interviews with Mitchell Quee, a man who, though unremarkable at first, had become a true folk hero. His sudden popularity was sparked by a scandal. The mysterious disappearance of his wife, Lindsay Wilson, according to him. One day she left home without a trace, leaving behind 2 young children. Her distraught husband appeared worried and abandoned, pleading for her to reconsider and return. Along the way, he shared details of their marital life, occasionally speaking unfavorably about his spouse. He believed her behavior was driven by a desire for a free and extravagant lifestyle. Mitchell mentioned seeing his former beloved driving around town in an expensive car, although she just passed by. Most likely, the grief-stricken mother had left her children for a wealthy fiancé. Despite the image portrayed on TV, in reality, he was enjoying a bachelor's life. As a result, one segment of the population sympathized with the lonely man, offering him attention and support, while the other doubted him and suspected him of a horrendous crime. While Mitchell enjoyed widespread attention, law enforcement continued to search for the missing woman. His persona did not inspire trust, and there were complications in the case. According to Lindsay's relatives and friends, the couple's relationship was different from what her husband claimed. Everyone who knew her considered her a faithful wife and caring mother. Therefore, they were convinced something terrible must have happened to Lindsay. Otherwise, she would have made contact long ago. Suspicion was fueled by Mitchell's words during a famous talk show. When the host asked if he had ended his wife's life, his guest said he would not respond to such an indecent question, then paused and added, "Wait and find out." What was the exemplary husband and father implying? Perhaps he knew more than he shared, or was he so confident in his innocence that he was just waiting for everything to fall into place? Answers to these and other questions are forthcoming. At 17, Lindsay discovered she was pregnant. Raised in a caring, large family, she hadn't imagined becoming a mother so early. She wasn't unprepared emotionally, but the fact that her boyfriend, with whom she'd been since she was 13, fled as soon as he learned about the impending fatherhood, both upset and scared her. Lindsay knew all too well the physical and financial demands of motherhood. The Wilson family, though loving and close-knit, had often faced financial challenges to provide for their children. Her parents worked tirelessly, therefore, when Lindsay met Mitchell 5 months into her pregnancy, she considered it a gift of fate. Mitchell, a 20-year-old, acted like a true gentleman, being attentive and caring. Most importantly, her delicate condition did not deter him. Mitchell assured her he had fallen in love with Lindsay at first sight and wanted to spend his life with her and raise the child as his own. At that time, he was earning well and even started working extra hours so his beloved would want for nothing. The young couple's parents were shocked when they announced their decision to marry. They felt the 5-week-old relationship hadn't withstood the test of time and circumstances, and thus couldn't genuinely celebrate for them. The only thing Lindsay's relatives noted was that her former cheerfulness and good health had returned. At the same time, the new boyfriend seemed overly sweet to them, even cloyingly polite. Ultimately, no one interfered with their marriage, keeping their doubts to themselves. Red flag, the wedding took place in August 1995 within a close family circle. The majority of the guests were from the bride's side. The groom's side was represented by no more than 5 people, his parents, a brother, and 2 friends. During the celebration, Lindsay was ecstatic, believing she had won the lottery in life. However, the uneasy premonitions of Lindsay's relatives grew heavier when, by the end of the evening, the newlyweds had a dispute. The conflict unfolded before everyone's eyes. Something displeased Mitchell, and he started to shout loudly. It was unlikely that the reason was significant or appropriate for such a reaction. During the argument, he grabbed his new wife by the hand and started shaking her, which looked more than odd and threatening. Lindsay tried to calm him down. When the emotions subsided, the man apologized to everyone and later made light of the incident, emphasizing that it was just nerves due to the holiday bustle. At that moment, the girl did not give due attention to the situation and quickly forgot about it. However, in reality, it became one of the red flags in their toxic relationship. On February 5, 1999, a social worker officially reported Lindsay missing, expressing concern over being unable to reach her client. Lindsay had sought psychological support in a short period of their life together due to recurring incidents of domestic violence and had bravely reported the situation at home. After her disclosure, the social worker had been monitoring the young family. She informed the police that she had been unable to contact Lindsay for several weeks. Every time she visited the home, Lindsay's husband would answer the door, and he was also the first to answer any phone calls. The dedicated worker mentioned that she repeatedly asked to speak directly to Lindsay, but received evasive excuses. During her visits, she consistently left her contact details, yet Lindsay never called back. The social worker found this situation unsafe and requested a welfare check. Law enforcement responded to the report and visited the address, but were also unable to speak with Lindsay. Her husband, Mitchell, explained that he had not seen his wife at home for a long time, but did not consider her missing. According to him, on Christmas Eve, Lindsay had gone to a party with a friend and returned home early in the morning, somewhat intoxicated. They had an argument, and afterwards, Lindsay packed her belongings and left, without saying goodbye to the children. He claimed she left him for another man and no longer wanted any contact. The search for Lindsay began. During conversations with her relatives, officers learned that she was last seen by her family on December 11th, appearing in high spirits, looking well, and her behavior was normal. Her family had grown accustomed to her troubled marriage. Lindsay's mother also reported that she had tried multiple times to reach her daughter on December 24th to arrange a visit to give Christmas gifts to the grandchildren. Unable to reach Lindsay, she decided to visit in person that day. Mitchell answered the door with the children and told her that his wife had left with friends and accused her of infidelity. However, Mrs. Wilson had long learned to take her son-in-law's words with a grain of salt. After giving the gifts to the children, she left. Detectives found it strange that no one had been concerned about the young woman's well-being for 2 months. However, there was an explanation. Everyone knew that Mitchell restricted his wife's interactions with the outside world, even with close relatives. They had previously experienced difficulty communicating with her. Therefore, it was plausible for Lindsay to drop out of sight for a while. Nonetheless, this did not mean they were not concerned about her. The news alarmed them. Everyone asserted that she did not drink and led a modest lifestyle. Moreover, her husband had forbidden her all contact with the outside world, not to mention meetings with friends and acquaintances. Mitchell told the police contradictory information that aroused the investigators' suspicions about his character. It seemed unlikely that Mitchell could simply let his wife go, and that Lindsay would leave her children with a tyrannical husband. However, the situation demanded a thorough investigation. To this end, the police spoke with all of Lindsay's acquaintances and tried to find anyone who had seen her after the family gathering. They also questioned neighbors and requested surveillance footage from the residential complex where the couple lived and its surroundings. Unfortunately, all footage had been deleted by the time Lindsay's disappearance was noted. Some time had elapsed, however. Another date was discovered when she was last seen in person. On December 15th, she was at the local post office sending several letters and postcards as usual. Her older sister also admitted that they met that day. Lindsay had visited despite Mitchell's disapproval. The sisters had tea and a brief conversation, after which Lindsay saw her guest out. On the way, she slipped a note into her sister's hand and asked her to read it later. The sister put the note in her purse, and in the whirlwind of days forgot about it. Regrettably, the older sister couldn't find it later, and its contents remain unknown. After that day, no one saw Lindsay again. Over several months, investigators tried to cling to any information. They began to suspect that she was no longer alive as she had not been in contact for so long. They couldn't charge Mitchell without sufficient grounds and evidence. However, the more they learned about the couple's life history, the stronger their suspicions grew. Shortly after their wedding, Mitchell and Lindsay decided to move away from their parents. They rented an apartment in Southport. Sometime later, Lindsay gave birth to a daughter named Robin. The only shadow over the joy of the new baby was her stepfather's volatile temper. After moving, the young wife fully experienced her husband's unstable moods. One moment he could be joking and laughing, the next he became unbalanced and aggressive. Trying to maintain a fragile peace at home, she didn't realize how completely she had submitted to his will. He controlled every step she took and caused a scene whenever she failed to hear the phone or answer a call. However, loud arguments were often followed by passionate reconciliations. Mitchell would kneel, beg for forgiveness, and profess his love. It seemed for a while that peace had returned to the family, but then the cycle would start again. Conflict, reconciliation, repetition. Lindsay began to lose recognition of the man she loved. She often told her relatives about what was happening. They advised her to return home and end her suffering. But it was hard for the young woman to admit her mistake. In one interview, the Wilsons mentioned that she always lived with thoughts of the past. Each time, her husband assured her he would change and everything would be fine. As a loving wife, she wanted to believe him and waited for him to return to his former self, gentle and caring. Meanwhile, Mitchell increasingly tightened his grip and control. He forbade his wife to go out alone in the evenings and eventually restricted her from being anywhere without him. He was jealous of her every move, yet he himself was seen in dubious liaisons. Once, Lindsay confided to her older sister that she suspected her husband of infidelity. She told her about a woman who came to their home looking for him and was very surprised to learn he was married. That day, another argument erupted, but this time it escalated to physical violence. Gradually, physical abuse became a part of their life. To prevent his wife from complaining about him and tarnishing his reputation, the man began to limit her interactions, starting with neighbors, friends and acquaintances, and later with her family. Despite being unhappy, Lindsay still tried to maintain contact secretly, fearing being discovered and punished. At the same time, despite the evident problems, Lindsay continued to stay with Mitchell. Along with her feelings, the comfortable life he provided was a factor. He earned well, supporting her and their child, paying the bills. She truly lacked nothing financially. The era of living in a gilded cage came to an end for Lindsay, when she found out she was pregnant again. At that moment, she was certain she no longer wanted more children. It's only fair to note that Mitchell was good to his stepdaughter, even loving her. However, Lindsay deemed the current circumstances unfavorable for bringing another child into the world, and decided to terminate the pregnancy. When her husband learned of this, he became enraged, hurling insults and physically intimidating her. That same evening, she packed her things, took her child, and returned to her parents' home. Her family breathed a sigh of relief. There, she proceeded with the pregnancy as she had planned. Over time, however, she began to miss her husband. He wouldn't leave her alone, frequently calling and begging her to come back. Mitchell tried everything to prove he had changed, and eventually, he managed to convince Lindsay. Initially, everything went well, and it seemed as if their old feelings had returned. The couple was expecting another child. This peace lasted for 6 months, until Mitchell had a severe anger outburst. Fortunately, he did not direct his rage at his pregnant wife, but took it out on the apartment. He smashed everything he could see, destroyed furniture, ripped doors off their hinges, and even stained the walls with blood and food remnants. He threw the television out of the window and smashed the car parked outside. The landlord demanded not only compensation for the damage and repairs, but also that they vacate the apartment. This situation worsened the family's financial position, requiring additional expenses. As a result, the couple had to take out a large loan and move to a more modest apartment. You can't run from yourself. In October 1997, their son Jack was born. Mitchell adored the boy, however. The relationship between the spouses became increasingly tense. Throughout their married life, Mitchell frequently left home, sometimes for a few days, sometimes for a week, often over trivial or fabricated reasons. Lindsay had grown accustomed to her husband's behavior. Yet when he abandoned her again, she filed for divorce and returned to her parents' home. Apparently, she realized she couldn't cope with the separation on her own. Therefore, she reached out to a local charity that assists women in difficult life situations. They helped her find subsidized housing in another city. Lindsay feared that Mitchell would discover her new address or phone number, so she took measures to distance herself from him. After he made several threats, she even obtained a restraining order from law enforcement. Mitchell remained unpopular with Lindsay's relatives. They too wanted nothing to do with him. Ultimately, their communication nearly ceased. Despite all efforts, Lindsay repeatedly returned to the abusive relationship. Thus, her circle saw no point in trying to save her anymore. They accepted the situation and stepped back. However, this time, her decision proved to be fatal. At the outset of the investigation into Lindsay's disappearance, Mitchell was initially helpful in the search efforts. However, as the case gained media attention, his focus shifted dramatically. He turned his misfortune into a public spectacle, becoming a media figure in the process. As Mitchell invited more journalists into his home, his abundant media appearances began to seem less genuine, with viewers often noting a smirk on his face. Lindsay's parents considered their son-in-law to be involved in their daughter's disappearance, and detectives also viewed him as the prime suspect. Yet, the lack of direct evidence tied their hands. Searches were conducted not just at the couple's home, but throughout the area. After a provocative question during a televised interview, the antagonist became even more brazen, even declaring that the time would come when his wife's family would have to apologize for their suspicions. On the eve of the holiday season, Mitchell sent a postcard to the lead investigator on the case. Attached to it was a pack of hair dye. Instead of a festive greeting, Mitchell wrote, "I hope this covers your gray and gives you a bit more confidence," mocking the detective and displaying his own arrogance. In February 2000, Mitchell found himself at the center of a scandal with a tarnished reputation. It became known that he had been forging his wife's signature to receive social benefits, serving as another indirect proof of his involvement in Lindsay's disappearance and presumed demise. The investigators wanted to latch on to a financial motive. However, the suspect's popularity worked in his favor. Many supporters emerged, arguing that as a single father, he had every right to financial assistance. These circumstances hindered the detectives' ability to bring the charges they desired. Nevertheless, they managed to charge him with fraud. Mitchell was brought to court for the benefit fraud and was found guilty, sentenced to a month of community service. This time, Mitchell couldn't walk away unscathed. The forgery of his missing wife's signature appeared more than suspicious. The number of angry comments increased. Eventually, the man's patience snapped and he began lashing out, blaming the media for intruding into his personal life. The case of Lindsay Mitchell's disappearance might have remained unsolved had it not been for a clue discovered by chance. On June 1, 2000, a parkgoer noticed his dog acting strangely near the roller coaster at a city amusement park. The animal uncovered human remains. Specialists were called to the scene, and the remains were sent for forensic examination, which revealed that they were parts of a female torso. Genetic testing confirmed they belonged to Lindsay, who had been missing for a long time. This breakthrough revitalized the investigation, making it clear that Lindsay had been the victim of a brutal crime. The focus now was to find the perpetrator. On June 7th, Mitchell was brought in for questioning. The detectives were determined, and after more than 36 hours of intermittent interrogation, the suspect broke down under the pressure and confessed to the dismemberment murder. On December 15, 1998, after meeting with her sister, Lindsay informed her husband that she wanted a divorce. This time, she was resolute. According to Mitchell, this news infuriated him, leading him to attack and strangle her. The incident occurred in front of their children. He then hid her lifeless body in their bedroom, stuffing the gap under the door to mask any odors. Realizing he couldn't dispose of the body alone, he enlisted the help of his brother Elliot, a butcher, who he thought could assist. Elliot was initially hesitant, but was eventually persuaded by Mitchell. While the children played in the next room, they dismembered Lindsay's body and later dispersed her remains across the city. During his confession, the murderer expressed no remorse or empathy. Instead, he seemed proud of his actions, stating that without his confession, they would never have proven his guilt. The next day, he led them to the other locations where he had hidden her limbs. Sadly, her head and one hand were never recovered. The forensic comparison confirmed that the remains were indeed Lindsay's. There was no doubt about Mitchell's guilt. The final judgment at the trial of the Key brothers took place in January 2001. The court proceedings were swift and straightforward. Mitchell was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 17 years. The court-appointed psychiatrist noted that the defendant showed all the signs of being a narcissist with sadistic tendencies. His brother Elliot received a 7-year sentence for his role in concealing the crime. Lindsay's children were taken in by her maternal grandparents, who gave them their surname. Just 3 months after the sentence was handed down, another tragedy struck the Lindsay family. One of Lindsay's older brothers, unable to cope with the shock, took his own life in the attic of their family home. In his farewell note, he wrote that he saw no point in continuing in such a cruel world and wished to reunite with his sister. As of 2017, Mitchell Kwai has been eligible for parole. However, as of January 2023, his lawyer's requests have been denied 3 times. Lindsay's family, including the children, are concerned that the murderer might eventually be released. Consequently, they have started a petition urging that he remain incarcerated. As long as the voices of the victim's family are considered, the criminal will continue to serve his sentence. Regardless, no punishment can bring Lindsay back. Experience shows that most women with domestic Stockholm syndrome try to adapt to their abusers throughout their lives. Even when their families come to their aid, they continue to act against their own best interests. In such cases, only deep self-reflection and psychotherapy can help. If the victim does not come to realize the recklessness of their actions, the end of the relationship will be dire. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Mia Skudhaug-Stevens. Herein lies a crime that shocked the nation of Denmark, a country renowned for its peace and low crime rate. On February 5, 2022, it was Saturday night. Mia Skudhaug-Stevens, 22, and her friends were excited for a night of partying and good times. Mia had just completed her 2nd semester in nursing school and eagerly anticipated socializing with her friends. It was a cold night in Aalborg, with temperatures dipping below freezing, and Mia, just like many other partygoers, dressed for the indoor bars and clubs she planned to visit. She wore a black top and black pants, her long, curly blonde hair cascading down her sides. Comfortable white sneakers adorned her feet, and she carried a black purse slung over her shoulders. She appeared no different from many other university students looking to unwind and enjoy their weekend. Mia danced and drank to her heart's content, enjoying herself, before they finally ended up at Club Vox. The club closed at 6 in the morning. Everyone was tired, but Mia wanted to continue the party. Her friend remembered that she was slightly drunk and dancing with strangers while hugging people she had just met. Nothing unusual for a friendly 22-year-old in Denmark. Outside the club, Mia and her friends briefly talked, before deciding to go their separate ways. A friend assumed that she would take the bus home and planned to follow up with her later. 13 hours had passed since Mia bid farewell to her friends. Her family grew increasingly worried as they hadn't seen or heard from her. They first checked with her boyfriend, assuming she might be with him or that he might know her whereabouts. To their surprise, he claimed he hadn't heard from Mia. This greatly worried them because Mia was known to be responsible and always informed them if she had changed plans. Contacting her friends did little to ease their concerns, as no one had any contact or knowledge of Mia's whereabouts since 6 a.m. that morning. Her parents became extremely worried, prompting them to file a missing persons report with the North Jutland Police Department. Desperate, Mia's family also took to Facebook, publicly requesting help from anyone who might know her whereabouts. The community rallied behind them, sharing posts and spreading the word. Given the circumstances of her sudden disappearance and knowing her responsible character, the North Jutland police took no chances. Despite Denmark's low crime rate, they treated her case as a worst-case scenario, believing that investigating and locating her as early as possible gave her the best chance of being found. The police promptly initiated an extensive investigation, imploring the public to safeguard and provide any photographs or videos captured by mobile phones, cameras, or other devices from the vicinity that morning. They were aware that this was a bustling area, well known and frequented by numerous individuals, and there had to be someone who possessed information about Mia, deliberately or inadvertently recording her on camera. The responses were staggering. Close to 400 calls, images, recordings, and messages flooded in from residents throughout North Jutland following their appeal for information. The country genuinely came together to assist in locating Mia. What remained was the laborious undertaking of painstakingly analyzing hours of footage for any clue regarding Mia's location. Mia's background was that of a normal 22-year-old with no criminal history. Born on September 19, 1999, she began her academic journey at Vesthimlands Gymnasium in 2016. Her pursuit of nursing led her to the University College of Northern Denmark, UCN, in Aalborg. On February 7, 2022, 26 hours had passed since Mia was last seen. The police once again appealed to the citizens of North Jutland, urging any eyewitnesses to come forward with information on Mia's whereabouts. Meanwhile, they meticulously combed through the footage retrieved from the surrounding area. Detectives began cross-examining people who knew Mia and anyone warned. She may have spoken with that night. A major clue emerged from CCTV footage dated Sunday, February 6th at 6:09 a.m., showing Mia standing at a bus stop at Vestbo 99. A black car stopped at the nearby Netto store, and after a brief conversation, Mia was seen getting in. The next bus was not due until 7:35 a.m., nearly 90 minutes later. It was a cold morning with temperatures hovering around freezing, and Mia was not dressed for the cold. The footage was alarming. Mia did not hail the car. Instead, the car stopped next to her. Frank Olsen, head of the investigation, stated that it appeared the driver contacted her first. Her friends and parents claimed it was out of character for her to get into a stranger's vehicle. The police speculated that the driver might have offered her a ride as an illegal taxi, a common practice in the area to avoid tax and licensing costs. However, this was purely speculation, supported by the fact that her bus home was not due for a long time. Due to the limitations in the quality of the footage, the police could not clearly identify the vehicle's license plate, and once again appealed to the public for help. On February 8th, the police shared the sequence of events leading up to Mia getting into the vehicle. After saying goodbye to her friends around 6:02 a.m., Mia walked from Jomfruanegade, took a left on Borgergade, and then another left into the Vestby district. She walked to the bus stop at Vestbo 99, waiting for her bus home. The black Volkswagen stopped moments later, and the driver engaged her in conversation. She got in and had been missing since. That same day, a breakthrough arrived. The police managed to identify the vehicle's license plate with the help of new footage and technology. The vehicle had parrot plates, a Danish term for a license plate with more than one background color. February 9th, 2022, 11:20 a.m., 53 hours have now passed since Mia disappeared. Police successfully traced the license plate to several addresses, specifically in Arumgers, Skorping, and a summer house in Saltham. Amongst these locations, they located the vehicle matching the CCTV footage, a 2015 Volkswagen Golf, at one of the addresses. Although Mia had not yet been found, this critical lead led to the arrest of two men. Both were childhood friends, and their connection to the vehicle's license plate brought them to the forefront of the investigation. These two men were known to the authorities for their history of petty crimes, including an incident where they had impersonated police officers at a soccer game. The men denied any involvement, but the vehicle being tied to them built a suspicious case against them, marking a significant turning point in the investigation. Within 24 hours, the police brought the two suspects to a constitutional hearing. In Denmark's legal system, a constitutional hearing is a preliminary court session held soon after an arrest, usually within 24 hours. The arrested individuals must be brought before a judge, along with the evidence that led to their suspicion. During the hearing, the judge examines the evidence and decides whether to keep the suspects in custody or release them. This process, outlined in the Danish constitution, ensures the rights of the accused are protected while maintaining public safety. February 10, 2022. It had now been 4 days since Mia went missing. Mia's family, friends, and the community continued holding on to hope for her safe return. At the constitutional hearing, held in private at the Aalborg District Court, it was determined that one of the two men arrested could be released from detention, though the charges against them could continue to be investigated. The other man, however, a 36-year-old named Thomas Thompson, was to remain in custody. Thompson even voluntarily agreed to be detained for 4 weeks. Thomas Thompson, an electrician, was described as polite, charming, neat, and proper. He was a sergeant in the armed forces and had practiced judo since his youth. The black Volkswagen was registered to Thompson, making him the most likely driver who picked up Mia the morning she disappeared. In fact, the police traced his movements using his vehicle's GPS system. Although the system had been manually turned off, for hours before Mia was picked up, the digital forensic team managed to retrieve much of his route. Consequently, the police's massive investigation focused on this route and his residences. They combed through multiple locations, including Thompson's residence in Flensvold, a summer house in Hammarby, and Erland Starkov. Clues began to emerge, painting a grim picture of what happened to Mia. Leading into the Hammarby forest from a clearing along the road, police dogs located Mia's keys, an elastic hairband, and 2 breast patches. These belongings were spread over a distance, indicating she may have been running and dropping them along the way. Their worst suspicions were confirmed in the forest area of Erland Starkov, a 10-minute drive from Thompson's home in the village of Flensvold. Here they discovered several shallow holes, which appeared to be dug by hand. Within them were dismembered human remains, hacked into over 200 pieces. The police assumed the worst, believing these remains likely belonged to Mia, and sent samples for confirmation. That very night, on February 10th, the police held a press conference to share these details with the public. Sadly, but clearly stating their belief that Mia had likely been murdered and dismembered, and they would push on with the investigation. On February 12, 2022, 2 days later, the remains were confirmed to be Mia, dismembered into 231 body parts. The coroners determined the body was dismembered with an electric saw, a hobby knife, and scissors. Some parts were partly dissolved with a strong alkali solution, such as sodium hydroxide. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation. What happened that day? Thomas disconnected the GPS in his car at 2:14 a.m. on February 6th, planning to avoid being tracked while he was out on the prowl. However, due to a fortunate technical error, the GPS still logged its position every 15 seconds. When confronted about why he disconnected the GPS, Thomas claimed he did this to avoid a certain police officer who, according to him, harbored a grudge and harassed him at every opportunity. His GPS was turned back on at 9:23 a.m. It's assumed that what happened to Mia occurred between 6:09 a.m., when she entered the vehicle, and 9:23 a.m. At 6:09 a.m., Thomas stopped next to Mia, rolled down the passenger side window, and offered her a ride, which she accepted, sitting down next to him. The trial took place in June 2023. According to Thomas's claimed in his own words, he said he pulled over and offered Mia a lift for free. According to him, Mia was flirtatious in the car. He drove them towards the training ground at Camp Hammer in Hammarby, because he wanted to show Mia something cool. When they arrived, they mutually agreed to have sex, but at one point, she became enraged when she learned he had been a sergeant. Thomas later explained in court that during this time, Mia accidentally fell and suffered a fatal twist to her neck, or was perhaps strangled by her backpack straps when she got out of the car with him in the wooded area of Hammarby. It's important to point out that his statements were contradictory. Initially, he asserted that she didn't stumble and fall until a considerable time had passed. However, in a subsequent statement, he mentioned that she tripped while exiting his vehicle. These inconsistencies raise questions about the reliability of his narrative. He acknowledged that he panicked and didn't know what to do, so he put her body in his car and drove it back home, where he dismembered her. He initially tried to use alkali to dissolve her body, but when that didn't work, he gave up and chopped her into pieces. He then partly buried her remains and scattered some in a deserted area in Orland-Starkov. Additionally, he burned buckets, tools, coveralls, a car mat, and possibly her bag in a fire, but he couldn't remember where. The police suspect that Mia entered Thomas's vehicle, expecting him to drive her home, since the next bus wouldn't arrive until 7:35 a.m. However, either through deception or coercion, Thomas took Mia to Hammarby against her wishes. There she was chased, overpowered, raped, suffocated, and mutilated. They completely reject Thomas's claim that she died from an accidental fall. Coroner Asa Heater Thompson from Aarhus University, who performed Mia's autopsy, testified on June 23rd. He cited systematic dismemberment intended to obscure the cause of death, but believed suffocation was likely. A fall, as described by Thomas, would be impossible. Thompson emphasized that sexual assault had occurred and that strangulation was the cause of her death, although crucial body parts confirming suffocation were missing. Other evidence indirectly supported this theory. Evidence suggests Mia ran for her life. Her belongings were scattered across the forest. Her hairband was found on the dirt road, her keys further down, and 2 chest patches in the dark forest, where Thomas claimed they never went. The GPS recorded 3 stops on the dirt road. Special Prosecutor Mette Bendix argued this indicated Mia fought for her life, dismissing any notion of mutual consent. The police believed Thomas committed these acts to fulfill deviant sexual gratification through control and power. Further evidence showed Thomas cruising around Aalborg with the GPS off that night before the murder. Before heading out, he watched porn featuring younger girls online. Due to the extensive tampering with the body, no scene traces were found. However, the police remained steadfast in their belief that rape occurred. DNA from Mia was found on the door handle to Thomas's bedroom, confirming she was dismembered at his home. In fact, Thomas maintained the facade of a completely normal life while dismembering Mia's body over several days. He bought pizza and sweets, went to work, and texted his friends with jokes and emojis as if nothing had occurred. If he was shocked by her accidental death, he sure didn't seem affected by it one bit. If anything, he seemed pleased with himself, as if he had gotten away with murder. According to the prosecutors, he believed he did. Was born on June 18, 1985. Thompson was raised in SE, and later moved to Falkenskald, a small town with 500 residents. Initially living in an apartment, he later moved into his grandparents' farmhouse. Raised in stable conditions without violence, crime, or abuse, Thompson made a career in the military as a sergeant before training as an electrician. He was considered good at his job, but was described as a loner by those who knew him in the village. In 2009, Thompson was convicted of being a peeping Tom after leaving semen on a girl's window. The incidents occurred in 2005 and 2006 in Frederick, Maryland. He would knock on the windows of 2 girls, identified as Louise and Maria, and masturbate. Thompson was only charged in Louise's case because semen was found on her window. Maria vividly recalled the humiliating experience, describing how she had gone to bed when someone knocked on her window in the middle of the night. Thinking it was a friend, she turned on the light but saw nothing due to the darkness outside. When she rolled up the blinds, she saw a man with his pants around his ankles, masturbating in the pouring rain. She remembered his blank, staring eyes and ran to wake her parents, who then contacted the police. Thompson's DNA also matched a trace from an old assault case involving a sleeping woman in Aalborg in 2010. The incident occurred in an apartment at Jammerlongad, where 2 women woke up to find a man sexually assaulting one of them. The man fled, and the case remained unsolved when Thompson picked up Mia Scott Hogg 7 in his car. It was also near Jammerlongad. The connection between the cases has only recently been made, likely due to advancements in DNA technology. However, the statute of limitations means Thompson cannot be prosecuted for the 2010 assault. Nevertheless, the 2 women involved and a witness have been summoned to testify in the current case. The testimonies of Thompson's ex-girlfriends also painted a disturbing picture. They described how he quickly went from charming and polite to controlling, arrogant, and manipulative. He insisted on having things his way and would get angry if he didn't get it. This behavior was corroborated by his childhood friend. The ex-girlfriends also recounted instances of transgressive sexual behavior, lies about his age and surveillance both during and after their relationships. A woman testified that he had tied her naked against her will. Another reported that her brake lines had been cut after their breakup, an act for which Thompson was convicted in 2010. A third woman discovered an Excel sheet listing women and their sexual activities on specific dates. Thomas Thompson pleaded not guilty to rape and manslaughter, admitting only to the indecent handling of corpses. The court could not find sufficient evidence to prove he raped Mia or exposed her to sexual relations beyond his claim of mutual intercourse. Thus, he was only found guilty of attempted rape. Only the killer, Thomas Thompson, and his victim, Mia Skadhawk, Stephen, know exactly what transpired that morning in the deserted forest area of Hammerbacker. It was there that he drove the slightly intoxicated young woman after trapping her in his car, following several hours of driving around, searching for a potential victim. In June 2023, the now 38-year-old electrician Thomas Thompson was convicted of murdering Mia Skadhawk Stephen. He was also convicted of attempted rape and indecent treatment of a corpse. The court noted particularly aggravating circumstances and sentenced Thompson to custody based on a mental evaluation conducted during the case. The Council of Forensic Medicine stated he is domineering, manipulative, and not reflective in relation to guilt. There is a high risk of repetition of violence and crimes of immorality. They concluded that Thompson posed a significant danger to the life, limb, and health of others if found guilty of the crime. Thompson continues to maintain his innocence regarding the charges of murder and attempted rape. Immediately after his sentencing, he appealed to the High Court. He's expecting to hear the judgment on his appeal by the end of May 2024, hoping for an acquittal or a lighter sentence. In the face of such tragedy, Mia's parents Brave linked the community for their outpouring of support. They wrote, "Thanks for all your thoughts and greetings, but we are asking for no flowers." This case sparked an increase in community concerns for more surveillance cameras in the city center. Additionally, a group of dedicated volunteers came together to establish the Safe House Initiative, which aims to ensure the safety of all young people traveling home. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Catherine Nevin. 55-year-old Tom Nevin was fatally shot in his pub, Jack White's, near Arklow, in the early hours of March 19th last year. He was killed by a single shotgun blast to the side as he was counting the takings after the St. Patrick's holiday weekend. His car, which was driven away after the robbery, was later discovered abandoned at Dartmouth Square in Dublin. Today, members of the investigation team took Mr. Nevin's widow, Catherine, into custody when she was visiting Dublin. She was arrested in the Ballabo area of the city at lunchtime and brought to the Bridewell Garda station, where she was charged with the murder of her husband and with soliciting others to murder him in 1989 and 1990. Shortly afterwards, she was taken before Judge Michael Connellan in the nearby Dublin District Court. Catherine Nevin, née Lee Scully, was born on October 1st, 1950 in the small village of Nerney, County Kildare. Growing up in a modest two-bedroom house with her brother and sister, she attended Presentation College, Kildare, an all-girls school run by nuns. Catherine excelled as a student, known for her diligence and deft hands. After leaving school, she invested in sewing machines and traveled the country, providing dressmaking lessons. She then ventured into the world of makeup, completing a beauty course and delivering lectures on makeup and presentation, where she demonstrated her exceptional teaching skills. Catherine's first significant employment was as a receptionist at the oldest hotel in Dublin, the Castle Hotel. Her colleagues described her as highly efficient, glamorous, and ambitious, with aspirations to establish her own model agency. At the young age of 21 in 1971, she met Tom Nevin, a regular visitor to the hotel, who was 10 years her senior. Their romance blossomed, and they married in Rome in 1976. Tom was a relatively wealthy, shy, and down-to-earth man, originally from the County Galway village called Tina. He was the eldest of 9 children and had a great love for sports, especially hurling. His easygoing charm, combined with Catherine's ambition, was a potent combination. When he married Catherine, he was managing his uncle's pub in Dolphin's Bar in Dublin. Over the years, Tom and Catherine went on to acquire and manage many properties around the city of Dublin, with Catherine being very hands-on in decorating the properties and collecting the rents. In March 1986, Tom and Catherine decided to purchase Jack White's pub in British Bay, County Wicklow, which is the setting for our story. They worked tirelessly, keeping the pub open from 8:30 a.m. until late at night. British Bay is a 4-kilometer stretch of beach on the Irish sea coast, and the beach and associated dunes are highly popular with Dubliners, being one of the most frequented beaches by residents of the capital during the summer. Acquiring Jack White's pub and restaurant was a very lucrative move for the Nevins. However, this is where Catherine's true nature emerged and her marriage began to deteriorate. Catherine was a bossy, bullying individual who was abusive towards both Tom and her young staff. While some may have seen her as a motherly figure, the general consensus was that she was a nightmare to work for. She had no qualms about belittling Tom in front of the staff and berating her young staff members, who would later speak out against her. An example of her pettiness was told by one staff member, where one night after closing, the staff and Tom were sitting around chatting and having a laugh. When Catherine came into the bar, she didn't like what she saw and confiscated the staff's tips tip jar, which was so petty and spiteful. Tom was affectionately known to the staff as Daddy. He was a gentle giant, standing at 6 feet 3 inches tall, and was caring and quiet. The staff loved him, and he would go out of his way to help any of them. However, Catherine ruled the workplace with an iron fist. One staff member reported that she was so strict and ruthless that her behavior bordered on inhumane. Kathleen, a cleaner on the staff, was told to come in early to redo rooms that she had already cleaned. At one point, Catherine asked the cleaner to work full-time, and when the cleaner refused, Catherine retaliated by contacting the social welfare officers and reporting that Kathleen had refused full-time work, thereby making her ineligible for government assistance. Catherine's actions were petty and vindictive. As early as 1986, Catherine and Tom were no longer a married couple. Tom slept in the staff quarters while Catherine occupied the main bedroom, openly entertaining male friends just doors away from Tom's room, a deeply disrespectful situation. Although Catherine had requested a divorce multiple times, Tom refused, as he had already annulled his first marriage, and his Catholic upbringing made him reluctant to go through another failed marriage. If Tom had granted the divorce, he might still be alive today, spared the years of humiliation before his staff, friends, and patrons. Between 1989 and 1991, Catherine desperately wanted to end the marriage, making no fewer than 18 requests to have her husband killed. She stood to benefit greatly from his death, as she would inherit the pub worth 670,000 Irish pounds, their 2 Dublin properties worth $1 million at the time, and a $78,000 payout from an insurance policy, along with 197,000 Irish pounds in cash. Catherine was not only all I've said above, but she was also a bit of a gore, as we would call her here in Ireland. She had men left, right and center with no shame, and she loved men in high-profile jobs. If someone high-profile visited Jack White's, she would fall over herself, as she was a bit of a sex kitten and used her sexuality to her advantage, with short skirts, low tops, and high heels. On Tuesday, the 19th of March, 1996, Tom and Catherine were to celebrate their 10th anniversary of owning Jack White's pub. It was just after Paddy's weekend, so the pub was extra busy. Tom didn't get the chance to go to the bank, and on the Tuesday evening, he was downstairs in the kitchen of the pub, counting the weekend's takings, while Catherine was asleep upstairs. According to Catherine, she was awoken by someone pressing her face into a pillow, and a man was shouting, "Jewelry, kill you," with a knife in his hand. Catherine was then tied up by her attacker. After a while, she heard 2 vehicles speeding away. She managed to get to a panic button, and the garter arrived around 4:30 a.m. They found Tom slumped on the kitchen floor, in a pool of blood, with a gunshot to his chest, still wearing his glasses and a pen in his hand. He was surely dead. A sum of 13,000 Irish pounds, equivalent to €16,500 today, was stolen, along with Tom's car, which would later be found in Dublin City, abandoned. It looked like a robbery gone wrong, but despite Catherine's story, there were no signs of a fourth entry, and the phone cards had not been pulled out of the walls, but 2 were off the hook. Catherine's bedroom was in a state of disorder, but it did not appear to have been systematically searched, and jewelry had been scattered around, but none was taken. From the time of the shooting, it would take Catherine a total of 2 hours before she pressed the alarm button to alert authorities of the break-in. She would greet the garter, scantily clad, and tell them she had been tied up with her own black tights, and her underwear had been thrust into her mouth as a gag. A guard of fingerprints expert found drawers discouraged on the floor, which appeared to have been lifted from the sides and placed on the ground. None of the doors and windows in the pub showed signs of forced entry. She had not gone to her husband's separate bedroom for help once she had freed herself. A witness would recall how on the day of the murder, Catherine had told staff they were not welcome to stay there that night in the pub, as they had often done after a night out, especially after a bank holiday weekend. While many of the circumstances seemed suspicious, and the Gardaí were confident they had their killer, there was still a lack of firm evidence, no forensics, no white witnesses, and no admission of guilt. Circumstantial evidence would not be enough to convict her. However, while they built their case, Catram would play the grieving widow to a T, all dressed in black, carrying a single red rose and lapping up the sympathy pool from family, friends, and people who knew them through their businesses. Catherine even installed a huge headstone at Tom's gravesite and writings of poetry inscribed, showing her love for Tom. She even took out an advertisement in a local newspaper that spoke of her devotion to Tom. It would take until April 1997 for Catherine to be arrested, shortly after she had sold the pub for £500,000. When she was later charged with murder and solicitation to murder, she had already become one of the most widely discussed and recognizable individuals in the country. Later, Tom's family would petition the courts to freeze all assets until the conclusion of the trial, including the proceeds from the pub's sale. In 2000, the first trial collapsed when it became known that the jury's deliberations had been overheard. The second trial was delayed when Catherine was hospitalized, but resumed a few days later. Catherine pleaded not guilty, and as the prosecution had only circumstantial evidence, they heavily relied on the testimony of 3 specific witnesses. Between 1989 and 1991, Catherine had approached these 3 men, who became the key witnesses for the prosecution. The first man was William McLean, a self-admitted smuggler from County Monaghan, who was among the initial barmen employed at Jack White's pub when the Nevins acquired it. He was also Catherine's first known extramarital companion, and he claimed to have been compensated solely through her kindness. Years later, he received a phone call from Catherine, informing him that she was hospitalized following a heart attack. However, it was in fact a cosmetic surgery procedure. She offered him £20,000 and the prospect of rekindling their relationship if he agreed to kill Tom. His response was a firm refusal. The second man was John Jones, a former member of the political party Sinn Féin, who ran an advice clinic at the back of his shop in Dublin. She had offered to host meetings in the pub to gain favor with the IRA. She visited his shop one day and directly requested that he have the IRA kill Tom. Jones thought she was joking and refused. A few weeks later, she would return with the same plan, but Jones would decline again. She even showed up at his business premises, bruised and bandaged, claiming that Tom had assaulted her. In fact, she had undergone cosmetic surgery again, as it seems our Catherine was fond of such procedures in the past. Eventually, she got the message and stopped asking. The third of these witnesses was Jerry Heaps, a former member of the Provisional Irish Republican Army, and he worked for John Jones in his shop. It was Jones who had originally introduced Jerry to Catherine. She approached him at least 10 times, asking him to help her kill Tom. Then she suggested to him that Tom could be killed during one of his weekly visits to the flats he owned, as it would be an opportune moment since he would have the pub takings with him. Every time Jerry refused, she would come up with another idea. One of these involved ambushing him after having a meal out with Catherine. He told her he couldn't do that because the bulk of the shot would pass through him and hit her. Catherine's response to this was that it would look great if Tom was to die in her arms. Jerry said no once again. Catherine also would have an affair with Guard Inspector Tom Kennedy, an affair he would deny in court. This affair began in 1991. Several staff members would say in court that Kennedy was a frequent visitor to the pub, and one staff member said she had seen him and Catherine in bed together on several occasions. Kennedy would say that Tom was his friend, and he was the only reason he went to the pub, but Tom would say different to one of his staff the morning after a retirement party that was held at the pub for Kennedy, where Catherine would gift him paid flights to New York to visit his children, a very generous gift on Catherine's part. Kennedy will go on to say to the Gardaí that Catherine was the type of woman who would give you a pain in the head when she started getting on about things. He said he was aware of the rumors of him and Catherine having an affair, but that he was over 60 and that sex would not be a concern of his. Next, we have Judge Danica Buckler, who was introduced to Catherine by Tom Kennedy. Edward said he too had an affair with her, which he also denied, just like Kennedy. It was also stated that he had his own key to the pub and would let himself in and out at all hours of the night. Allegedly, Tom was very upset by this affair, according to staff members, and he would frequently argue with Catherine over it. Catherine would later go on to deny these affairs in court. On the day before Tom's murder, Monday the 18th of March, the bar and lounge saw steady customer traffic. The only unusual occurrence that day was a visit by a strange man wearing a long overcoat and carrying a bag. This man then went to make a phone call, and one of the staff said he was muttering into the phone. He spoke to Tom, and the staff presumed Tom knew him, given the nature of their conversation. This man was not seen leaving the pub that day, and it is possible that he did not leave, but instead hid in the pub and later, in fact, shot Tom. Also, after Tom died and Catherine was under investigation for his murder, there was no objection to oppose her taking on the license of the public house exclusively. The judge Danica Abucola would be the one to grant her the license in his private chambers. Another theory was that the captain herself was the one who pulled the trigger, as she was the only one in the pub that night. Tom did not appear to act defensively immediately prior to it. He still had his glasses on his nose, and his pen was in his hand when the guards found him. He would not have been unduly surprised by her arrival in the kitchen. While there was no evidence of firearm residue found on her clothing, they only tested the clothes she was wearing on that night. But she could have changed her clothes before she tied herself up. After all, she had 2 hours before she got help. She also admitted to washing her hands before their arrival. In another scenario, Catherine would have had to be assisted by an accomplice who tied her hands and took the money, the gun, and the car to Dublin. The other theory is that Catherine helped one or more people to carry out the killing. The trial of the notorious Black Widow, as she was dubbed, captivated the nation from start to finish, and she quickly became one of the country's most high-profile killers. She assassinated Tom's character by claiming he was abusive and alcoholic. Despite Catherine's continuously glamorous appearance and impeccable grooming, her tight-lipped expression and stubborn chin, along with her apparent determination to appear matronly rather than seductive, could not be concealed. Her appearance was part of the extensive web of lies she had constructed to shield herself. The media reported on Catherine's appearance, from her clothes, her hair, and makeup, and even down to her nail polish. In court, it became such a problem that Judge Carl put a ban on the press reporting on her appearance. After a gripping 42-day trial, the jury of 6 men and 6 women deliberated for a record 5 days before she was found guilty, in April 2000, for paying a hitman to murder her husband, and for soliciting 3 men to do the same. She received life in prison. 3 years later, Catherine was back in court, trying to get her case overturned. The Court of Criminal Appeal said, however, that it was satisfied there was nothing in the new material that could come to light that could have assisted in Catherine's defense, and so it was dismissed. In 2010, she had another miscarriage of justice appeal dismissed. In 2014, she was denied in her bid to appeal her murder conviction to the Supreme Court. Tom had not made a will, and Catherine and he never had any children, so she was to inherit everything. Tom's mother had effectively frozen Tom's estate, including the proceeds from the sale of the pub. The application of probate by Catherine was still pending on the results of the trial, and when she was found guilty, she lost any claim to the estate. Tom's mother had also initiated legal proceedings to try and have her disinherited. She died a year before Catherine had been convicted of her son's murder, and her case was taken over by her son Patrick and daughter Margaret. They believed they should be allowed to rely on her conviction as part of their legal action, and the Supreme Court agreed. So basically, Catherine got absolutely nothing when she was found guilty. In September 2016, Catherine was admitted to the hospital and was later diagnosed with a terminal brain tumor. She stayed there for 3 days and was granted a reviewable temporary release, RTR, to receive treatment. On November 7, 2016, she was transferred to an acute post-care unit while undergoing medical treatment. She remained there until August 2017, when she again received an RTR for pre-release and resocialization. She was provided with supportive accommodation and stayed there until she was rehospitalized on November 6, 2017. In December 2017, she was moved to a hospice care facility, where she remained until her death in February 2018. She was 67 years old. Catherine protected her innocence until the end. Despite being convicted of murder by a jury, She insisted that this was not conclusive proof of her guilt. Additionally, she never revealed who had assisted her in killing Tom. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Liga Skroman. India is the only country in the world where cultural and religious traditions have not been interrupted since ancient times, which is probably why it attracts tourists from all over the planet. But in our story, we will look at India like a coin that has a different image on each side. On April 20th, 2018, at dawn, two young men went fishing down the river toward a mangrove forest. They took a long boat ride downstream until they reached a remote and quiet place. One of them jumped into the water to tie up the boat, but his attention was distracted by a pungent, acrid odor that was very close by. They went ashore and followed the odor. Curiosity led them to a horrifying find. There was something that looked like a human body hanging on a tree branch and a skull lying nearby. The guys abandoned the boat and rushed to the nearest village to report the terrible find. A team of investigators, forensic experts, and police officers urgently arrived on the spot. The experts confirmed that the suspended body was indeed human. It was obvious that it had been hanging for a long time and had already begun to decompose. The flesh on the arms and legs had torn off, and the skull was found nearby. Next to the body were packs of cigarettes, packaged drinking water, and a lighter, which probably belonged to the victim. An investigation was conducted at the scene the same morning. The evidence found was seized, and the remains were sent for examination. The modest remnants of clothing that could be identified on the victim revealed that Liga Skroman, a 33-year-old hiker, was the victim of an accident. But who is Liga Skroman, and what happened to her on the riverbank? Liga Skroman was born in Latvia in 1986. She grew up in a large and friendly family, had an older brother and a younger sister. The sisters were very friendly, and from childhood shared all joys and hardships with each other. Growing up, Liga moved to Ireland, but always maintained close relations with her family. It was in Ireland that she met Andrew Jordan. It was not love at first sight, as the modest Liga had difficulty in communicating with new people. But after 5 years, Liga and Andrew turned into a married couple who made great plans for the future. Despite the fact that Liga worked in a hotel and led a modest lifestyle, she dreamed of opening her own center of yogic retreats in Portugal. Andrew supported his beloved's idea, and together they saved money for 4 years to fulfill their dream. But fate had other plans. In early 2018, Liga was experiencing the effects of an aggravated skin disease that was causing physical and mental discomfort. To help her sister overcome this ailment and restore her emotional state, her sister Ilse invited Liga on a trip. So in February 2018, Liga and Ilse traveled to Tiruvananthapuram, the capital of Kerala, so that Liga could receive Ayurvedic treatment for depression. Kovalam is the premier Ayurvedic resort of Kerala in India. Kovalam, which means grove of coconut palms in Hindi, is a small village offering everything you need for a comfortable and complete rest and treatment. Ayurveda is the oldest system of medical knowledge, which originated more than 5,000 years ago. Ayurveda is based on the universal laws of nature, on the unity of all things in this world. Ayurvedic programs help a person to restore balance and harmony in the body. Panchakarma is the best Ayurvedic program for modern man in Kerala. Panchakarma helps to reboot the body effectively. Most of those who have undergone the Panchakarma course in Kerala repeat it annually, and it is not without reason. As regular Panchakarma not only allows us to get rid of extra pounds, but also adds a couple of decades of healthy life. Since 1985, Ayurveda has been recognized by the World Health Organization as the most effective system of alternative medicine in the world. Let us emphasize that all the promised benefits of Ayurveda are only an alternative, not a panacea for healthy longevity. The 33-year-old Liga and her sister came to Kerala in search of spiritual enlightenment, hoping to be cured of depression in one of the Ayurveda centers. Their treatment tour was scheduled for 6 weeks and included yoga classes, meditation, therapeutic herbal drinks, and nutritional and massage recommendations. The sisters were treated together at an Ayurvedic clinic at Kovalam in Kerala and have already completed their course. On the morning of March 14th, Liga refused to go to yoga class with her sister, explaining that she had a headache. When Isla returned to her room, Liga was not there. With the help of the hotel staff, Liga was able to find out that her sister left the hotel around 11:30 a.m., wearing leggings and a yoga t-shirt, hired an auto rickshaw, and went to Kovalam Beach for a walk. The beaches around Kovalam are popular destinations for both domestic and international travelers. The sandy beaches of Kovalam are always crowded, however, Liga could not be found there. Liga wandered the beach until late at night, showing her sister's picture, but never heard the long-awaited response that someone had seen her. This was actually strange, as Liga was a tall white girl who definitely stood out, and if she was actually on the beach, someone should have seen her. After searching unsuccessfully, Isla went to the police station to report her sister missing. However, the Indian police officers did not show any sympathy for the missing foreign tourist. On the contrary, they complacently asserted that they would surely find the girl who had strayed, or that she would surely return the next day. They were not even deterred by the fact that Liga, according to her sister, had psychological problems and could be an easy target for criminals. The police registered a case, but the investigation started coldly, or rather, it is more correct to say, did not start at all. Liga had traveled extensively in Kerala, visiting Kollam, Varkala, and finally came to Kovalam. She considered herself a very experienced traveler in India, and this time, she took her sister with her to show her the India she loved so much. But the trip turned tragic. After a few days of inaction by the Indian police, Liga started searching on her own. She enlisted the help of friends, and also reported Liga missing to her husband, Andrew, who flew urgently to India. The police investigation intensified after the missing person's husband, Andrew Jordan, and Liga contacted the local press and started an online campaign to find her. Liga also reached out via Twitter to India's Foreign Minister, Sushma Swaraj. "Please help, my sister, a Latvian citizen, has been missing for 8 days. We are very worried," she wrote. The desperate sister announced a reward of 100,000 rupees to anyone who could help find Liga or provide any information about her movements that day. Liga and her friend, Alexa, who had also traveled to India after hearing about Liga's disappearance, put up posters in the Kovalam beach area where Liga was last seen. Together, they put up flyers and distributed them to people. Numerous locals took an active part in the search for the missing tourist. The important fact remained that Liga suffered from depression and had a hard time interacting with strangers. On the day of her disappearance, she hired an auto rickshaw to reach the beach and was never seen again. She had about 8,000 rupees with her, but no passport, so she could not leave the country. Ashok Kumar, head of the local police station, said that the police had no leads in the case. The police kept saying that the tourist had gone on a bender and would soon return on her own. However, regular, persistent requests for help from Liga and Andrew forced the police to search for Liga. The search operation was conducted in the Kovalam beach area where Liga Scani was last seen. Police assumed that she had drowned, just as the unidentified body of a woman was found washed ashore at Kakal in Kanyakumari district. Investigators examined the body along with the missing woman's sister, but the latter did not identify it as her sister. The version of drowning was not confirmed, and the search for Liga continued. Andrew, on the other hand, was convinced that his wife had been kidnapped by local gangs for the purpose of selling her. He tried to infiltrate these gangs to get more information, but was exposed and warned that repeated contact with the gangs would result in him having to leave the country. A month after Liga went missing, there was still no leads to help find the girl. Liga continued to look for her sister. She visited Kovalam beach every day and watched people. On one such day, she spotted a boat and she had a theory. The only way to leave or leave the beach unnoticed was by boat. On April 17, 2018, after a forced hiatus, Andrew returned to India to continue his search. Liga and Andrew entered a new struggle to find Liga Skramana, but her body was still not found. The search was complicated by the fact that Liga was a tourist and a citizen of another country. The Latvian Foreign Ministry said the embassy was in constant contact with Liga's relatives and was also working closely with the Indian police. The Latvian embassy also appealed to the Indian Foreign Ministry with a request for special support in the search for Liga, as well as the Honorary Consul of Latvia in India, whose consular district includes the region where Liga disappeared. At the request of the Kerala state government, the Indian Navy and Air Force joined the search for the missing Latvian citizen. The search operation involved an N-32 transport plane, Gemini inflatable boats, underwater sonar, and 5 deep-sea divers. But even this extensive effort did not bring the desired result, and Liga remained missing. The search continued, and by this time, all local residents knew about the missing tourist from Latvia. They supported and sympathized with Andrew and Liga. On April 20, 2018, Liga's phone received the longest-awaited yet most horrific call of her life. A body had been found in the mangrove jungle. She and Andrew drove to the designated spot where the police were waiting for them. For the boat crossing, Liga's heart was pounding like never before. She felt that for the moment, she would have to swim the path that Liga had traveled to her demise. On the spot, horror overwhelmed her. Liga saw her sister's clothes. She recognized the shirt and leggings on the body, but the jacket and shoes did not belong to Liga. It remained unclear how, with whom, and why Liga had gotten to a place that could only be accessed by going through Panader from Samudra Beach. Two women confirmed that they had witnessed Liga traveling alone into the mangrove forest. But why would a girl who was being treated for depression and already alone take a boat to a remote place in the forest? The body was shifted to the medical college hospital, where it underwent an autopsy, which was captured on video camera. The police said they could not confirm the identity of the body until DNA analysis was completed. According to the city police commissioner, the body was badly mutilated with the head lying nearby. Police tentatively identified the dead woman as missing tourist Liga Scrumain. In favor of the investigators' conclusions is also the fact that Liga's relatives identified the victim by her hair and clothes. One of the versions put forward by rescue services in India was poisoning. There are poisonous pong trees in the mangrove forest, and she could have accidentally or intentionally eaten their fruit and poisoned herself. Between 1989 and 1999, more than 500 people died from poisoning by its fruits in Kerala alone. However, this theory seemed nonsensical because the person was found hanging upside down, but there was no head. It is obvious that if Liga had been poisoned, her body would have been in a completely different position, and the head would have been in place. The Indian authorities were talking utter nonsense. Based on the information about Liga's complex psychological problems, the investigators also considered the possibility that Liga had voluntarily taken her own life. Liga feared that the police would try to pass off her sister's murder as a voluntary departure from life. Although a rope had been found at the scene, and it could be concluded that the hiker had hanged herself, Liga demanded a separate explanation for the missing head. "Don't tell me it's lost," Liga said sarcastically in yet another appeal on the internet. Breathlessly, Liga and the anxious public waited for the results of the forensic tests. The forensic results were overwhelming. The report stated that there were areas of blood pooling in part of Liga Scrumain's brain, as well as bruising in the neck area. The autopsy revealed that the woman had been strangled by several people and was killed in an attempted violent attack. There were external injuries on the body, probably sustained during the struggle. However, the fact of violence could not be definitively confirmed as the body was in the decomposition stage. There were characteristic injuries on the cartilage in her throat, which indicated that someone had forcefully squeezed her throat. The trauma was severe enough to be fatal, according to forensic experts. There were blood clots in her brain, which confirmed strangulation. They also noted that there were bruises on her neck and legs. A total of 9 wounds were recorded on Liga Scrumain's body. In view of the above, the police no longer considered the version of voluntary death. According to the autopsy, it was determined that Liga was murdered after resisting or struggling. Hills breathed a sigh of relief and hoped that the police would soon find her sister's killers. But there were complications as well. As part of the investigation, the police began checking out local drug dealers and card players. In addition, during interviews with local residents, 2 women said that they saw Liga walking alone to the place where her body was later found, but the police said they did not fully trust their words. Meanwhile, Liga's relatives have accused Indian police of incompetence, claiming that if the girl had been searched for immediately, the tragedy could have been avoided. The 33-year-old Latvian tourist is believed to have been grabbed from a nearby beach and transported by boat before being strangled. A special team of investigators has begun looking for those responsible for the crime. About 40 suspects were interviewed. However, arrests were planned to be made a few days later after the law enforcers had enough evidence. The Indian police conducted an investigation that led to the arrest of 2 men who were eventually accused of killing Liga Scrumain. Police revealed that Liga Scrumain was lured by 2 men who then abused her before dismembering her body. The alleged assailants, who are now in custody, are local dealers in illegal substances. The suspects fully confessed under torture. Both the accused were pimps and were also dealing in illegal substances, police said. The autopsy did not reveal much evidence because Liga's body was badly decomposed. Andrew Jordan filed a petition in Superior Courting for a review of the felony murder case. He believed that more people were involved in the woman's murder. In the petition, he pointed out that both defendants later recanted their pleas of guilty to the crime. According to Jordan, the men may have confessed because they were tortured, which, as it turns out, is a common practice in India. However, the Supreme Court of India denied the murdered woman's common-law husband, Andrew Jordan, a review of the case due to lack of direct evidence. The trial was postponed for 2 months, but Andrew was outraged by this attitude of the authorities. He had earlier accused the Kerala authorities and police of incompetence and attempts to cover up Liga's murder, so as not to scare away tourists. Both the suspects' lawyers asked for, and got a postponement by law. They have the right to postpone the case once without giving any reason. The more they postponed, the more he was convinced the case was unclean. However, both suspects were in custody. Investigation revealed that 32-year-old Umesh and 28-year-old Adyakumar offered Liga scanny weed, and when she was drugged, they used it and then strangled and decapitated her. It is noted that the 2 men apprehended for the murder of Liga Scram had previously committed similar crimes on numerous occasions. Both of them worked for a food delivery company in the Kerala capital and earned money as illegal tour guides in their spare time. Umesh and Udyan have been charged with destruction of evidence, murder, poisoning, kidnapping, and rape. The place where Liga's corpse was found had earlier served as a pleasure ground for Umesh. He used to take men there. 13 criminal cases have been filed against him, including 6 for sexual assault and 1 for attempted murder. Several of Umesh's victims have testified against him. Liga Scram, along with both men, was seen in the area by several people. They were initially silent, but confessed to everything after the body was found. The detainees confessed to police that they committed the murder while attempting violence. They were apprehended, but had previously claimed that they had only seen Liga Scram in Kovalam. The men pleaded guilty after repeated interrogations. On December 6, 2022, the court finally sentenced both men to life in prison. The court also recognized that the criminals must pay compensation to Liga Scram's sister, Ilsa, 65,000 rupees each. We would like to note that there has been a whole series of such crimes in this country recently. Young girls are regularly subjected to violence. The problem of crime in India is very acute due to the huge number of sexual acts against minors. The government has introduced the death penalty. It is also worth noting that if the relatives, and primarily Liga's sister, had not been persistent, had they not involved the press by organizing a press conference and an influential MP, it is obvious that the local police would hardly have seriously investigated the case. At first, a theory was put forward that Liga had allegedly passed away voluntarily. And as it now turns out, this is not the first incident in this very place where Liga was found. After this story, I would like to warn once again, all women who are frivolous about the dangers of traveling alone in India, do not seek spiritual enlightenment in distant, dangerous, and uncharted countries. Take care of yourself. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lorena Bobbitt. It's said that a humiliated and insulted woman is capable of anything, with the most terrifying in this list being revenge. Cruel, ingenious, and sometimes unpredictable. Much in this regard depends on the lady's level of sanity, but one must not overlook the depth of her hurt. This destructive emotion can be carefully hidden within a woman for years. But if it erupts, it will sweep away everything in its path. The story of the Bobbitt spouses in the early 90s shook the world, and their surname became a byword, spawning the verb to bobbit, which means to cut or to chop. This case drew heightened public attention, not just to the issues of domestic violence, but also to such a delicate subject as marital assault, which many try to sidestep. Lorena Leonor Bobbitt was born on May 15, 1970, in the town of Bucri, located in eastern Ecuador, near the province of Chimborazo. She was the youngest child in a simple and very modest family. When she was in elementary school, her family moved to Venezuela and settled in Caracas. Lorena grew up quite clever. She performed well in school, was diligent and goal-oriented. In her teenage years, she lost her father, and her relationship with her mother, Elvia Gallo, was quite strained. As soon as she graduated from school, she decided to move to the United States to live with her cousin, Jana Basutti. Her relative gladly took her in and helped her with the paperwork for a student visa. However, she was a very conservative woman, so Lorena, living in her house, had to abide by a strict set of rules, just like Jana's own children, and also take on some of the household duties. Despite everything, the young woman decided to stay in the U.S. as she realized that it offered her far more opportunities than Latin America. She had long been attracted to the beauty industry, so Gallo decided to train as a manicurist. Moreover, Basutti owned her own beauty salon, located in the city center, had extensive experience in the field, and was eager to help her niece learn the profession by allowing her to observe the work of the specialists and practice on her own. Later, her aunt arranged for her to work part-time in her salon. About 8 months after she moved to the new country, the young woman had settled in, enrolled in college, and was working as a manicurist in her relative's salon while gradually saving money. In September 1988, Lorena was preparing to go to a party with several of her friends. Her aunt gave her strict instructions on how to behave and what time she needed to be home, and she promised that everything would be fine. The modest young beauty was nervous, as it was her first time preparing to go to a nightlife establishment late at night. She chose a relatively modest outfit, unlike her friends, applied makeup, and styled her hair fashionably. Upon arriving at the nightclub, she was struck by the carefree and festive atmosphere. Inside, the venue was filled with young people dancing, having fun, and socializing, and Lorena couldn't help but think that such a place might be where she could meet the man of her dreams. This thought proved to be prophetic. A few minutes later, she noticed a very attractive young man intently looking at her and smiling. He waved at her, and she waved back. Then the young man approached her and introduced himself. He was John Bobbitt, and he could not take his eyes off the young beauty with the quite exotic appearance. The guy was handsome, tall, and charismatic. He cracked jokes and skillfully paid compliments, so she couldn't resist his charm. They spent the evening dancing and chatting, and afterwards, the new acquaintance walked Lorena to her aunt's home. As they said goodbye, he asked for her home phone number and promised to call soon. John Wayne Bobbitt was born on March 24, 1967, in Buffalo, in the northwestern part of New York State. He was the youngest of 3 children in his family. At the age of 3, the boy lost his father, who tragically died, and his mother, unable to cope with the shock, ended up in a psychiatric clinic after a serious nervous breakdown. All 3 children were taken into the care of their religious aunt and uncle, who wanted to help their relatives in this difficult situation. The boy was still very young at the time, but the events that occurred undoubtedly left a mark on his life. The aunt and uncle raised the children with strictness, in accordance with religious canons. They all attended church every Sunday and engaged in charity work, trying to help those around them. John was not an outstanding student, but overall, he did fairly well in school. As a teenager, he decided to pursue a future in military service. After undergoing the necessary training and special preparation at a military academy, the young man joined the ranks of the Marines, where he proved himself as a brave, disciplined, and determined young man. However, after a few years, the strict regime and the need to obey in the army began to weigh on him. After leaving the service with some military experience and skills, he was hired as a security guard at one of the city's popular establishments, but he later changed jobs frequently, not staying long at any. The day after they met, John, as promised, called Lorena to ask her out on a date. The young couple simply walked through the park, engaging in easy conversation about various topics, and John made it clear that he wanted to continue their relationship. Lorena was not opposed to this, but according to the rules set by her aunt, she had to introduce her boyfriend to her before they could start a serious relationship. John accepted all the conditions, and on the appointed day, he came to dinner at the home of his beloved's relative. Bobbitt was very sweet, courteous, and considerate, yet he made an effort to appear serious. He managed to make a good impression on the strict janitor, and after a serious one-on-one conversation with the young man, the woman allowed her niece to continue seeing John. 6 months after the start of their romantic relationship, the suitor proposed to Lorena, and she accepted. She was overjoyed, having always dreamed of a family, children, and a home of her own. The couple began preparing for the most important event of their lives, and in June 1989, shortly after Gallo turned 19, they made their union official. The wedding celebration was quite modest, as the young couple did not have the money for a lavish ceremony, and they chose to spend their savings on a honeymoon by the warm ocean coast. They were happy, but the only shadow over the celebration was the absence of the bride and groom's parents. Instead, their aunts and uncles came to share the joyous moment with them. After the wedding and a delightful honeymoon, the couple moved to Virginia and settled in a quiet and cozy area of the city called Manassas. The first few months of their life together were like a real fairy tale. They enjoyed each other's company, showing mutual tenderness, care, and love. But as the new year of 1990 approached, the situation began to change for the worse. At first, Lorena tried not to pay much attention to some of her young husband's remarks and rudeness, thinking it was just a so-called adjustment period. But one day, when she served cooled soup for dinner, her husband simply threw the plate on the floor and then started yelling at his wife, insulting her, and calling her a terrible homemaker. She tried to argue, pointing out that he closely monitored where she went and who she spoke to. At home, she had to follow the rules he set, and intimacy between them occurred only when John wanted it, regardless of Lena's wishes. The poor girl couldn't share her problems with anyone, as she found the situation shameful and humiliating. On June 22, 1993, John, along with his longtime military buddy, decided to go out to an entertainment venue. The men partied and drank until late at night, while Lorena was at home alone. She did not wait up for her husband and went to the bedroom around midnight, soon falling asleep. Around 3 in the morning, a drunk and aroused John returned home. He didn't waste any time and ripped the shirt off his sleeping wife. Lorena hardly understood what was happening when her husband forcefully took advantage of her. She begged him to stop and not to do this, crying, but he was completely indifferent to her pleas and tears. After it was over, John simply collapsed next to her and fell asleep. Lorena, trembling and sobbing, made her way to the kitchen. She poured herself some water and took a few sips to calm down. But then her gaze fell on a stand with large, sharp kitchen knives. Her hand reached out on its own and pulled out a carving knife. Out of her mind, she went back to the bedroom, where her husband lay on his back, snoring drunkenly. She grabbed his genitalia with her left hand, squeezed hard, and sharply cut through with the knife, severing a large part of it. John jumped up, screaming in agony, while Lorena simply walked out of the room, went to the garage, and got into her car, speeding away through the deserted nighttime streets of the city. She only came to her senses at an intersection when she saw a red light at the traffic signal. At that moment, she looked at her blood-stained hands and realized that she was still holding the severed part of John's body in her left hand. She rolled down the window and threw the detested piece of flesh out, then continued driving. Lorena headed to the home of a close friend who was stunned by her nighttime visit and the state she was in. After Lorena told her what had happened, her friend, realizing the gravity of the situation, called the police herself and summoned a medical team to the house where the injured Bobbitt was. Precision surgery was required. Throughout this ordeal, John was desperately trying to stop the bleeding by pressing a sheet against his wound. Notably, the groin vein is a major vessel, and its injury nearly always results in death from blood loss. However, John was somewhat fortunate, if one could say that, because a clot had formed, significantly slowing the blood loss. The responding medics arrived in time to transport him to the nearest hospital, where he received immediate medical attention. The question then arose about the whereabouts of the severed part of his genitalia, as it was still possible to reattach it to its original place, with restoration of its initial physiological functions. Lorena indicated the approximate area of the road where she had discarded her husband's anatomical fragment, and after an extensive search, the police were able to find it. The amputated organ was cleansed with antiseptic, then placed in a special container with medical ice, and urgently transported to the hospital, where the injured party was already being treated. The surgeon, who arrived from the state capital, was astounded by the complexity of the situation, as he had never encountered such a case before. But he proceeded with the operation anyway. He performed a unique surgery for that time, which lasted more than 9 hours, and was more than successful. Despite the traumatic amputation of the organ, and the fact that it had lain on the road for over an hour, all tissues and vessels were successfully reattached, and the patient quickly began to recover. Public outcry ensued. That same night, Lorena was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning, as well as to clarify all the circumstances and motives of her actions. She immediately confessed to everything, and shared her harrowing story that had driven her to such a desperate act. She recounted how 4 years of marriage had turned into a real nightmare for her, with her husband regularly abusing her, both emotionally and physically, and forcing intimacy only when he desired. Mrs. Bobbitt also mentioned how, about a year ago, her husband had forced her to terminate a pregnancy, despite her deep desire to have a child, and that abortion had been a traumatizing event for her. Regarding the incident itself, she said she remembered very little of that night, and had acted as if she were in a fog. Lorena recounted how her husband had come home drunk and simply taken advantage of her, and although she tried to resist, he ignored her. After the incident, she went to the kitchen for water, and the next thing she remembered was her husband's scream, the roar of the car engine, and the part of his genitalia that she was clutching in her hand as she sat behind the wheel. The case caused a significant stir in the press and was actively covered by the media. Many women like Lorena, who had suffered from domestic violence, as well as feminist organizations, which were gaining strength and popularity at the time, rallied to her side. In the early 90s, wives who were subjected to emotional and physical abuse by their husbands typically remained silent about their plight. Society was still inclined to blame the victims themselves, suggesting that they provoked conflicts or behaved improperly. It was assumed that a wife should be submissive and obey her husband in everything, and if the husband was dissatisfied and resorted to violence, it was considered the wife's fault. It was her fault. Intimacy in marriage was considered a duty of the wife, not open to discussion. On the other hand, almost all men sided with John. Many feared that Lorena's act might prove contagious, prompting other women suffering from physical and intimate violence in marriage to also take up knives. According to official statistics, there were several million such women in the country at that time. Trials and sentences of the spouses, two parallel court cases, began almost simultaneously. Lorena officially charged her husband only with taking advantage of her on that fateful night, although in court she detailed the years of regular abuse and beatings, emotional violence and humiliations she endured, as well as the abortion she was forced to undergo against her will under her husband's coercion. John's testimony was confused. He denied all allegations against him, but much of what Lorena said was corroborated by facts. For instance, it was confirmed that he did not have steady employment or a stable source of income, yet he loved spending time in entertainment venues, often forcibly or deceitfully taking money from his wife to do so. Additionally, Lorena's friends confirmed that they had repeatedly seen bruises and scrapes on her body, and she had been in a depressed state for a long time, though she tried not to complain. The court concluded that the husband had indeed abused his wife both emotionally and physically throughout their marriage, driving her to desperation. However, regarding the charge of intimate violence that occurred on the night of June 23, 1993, there was not enough evidence, and thus John was acquitted. He presented several versions of what happened that evening, and the jury, composed of 9 women and 3 men, found him not guilty. In the fall of that year, Lorena's trial began in September 1993. She was charged with inflicting severe bodily harm on her spouse. Her lawyers argued that she acted while suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, caused by the ongoing emotional and physical abuse from her husband. A psychiatric evaluation was ordered, which confirmed that she acted in a state of distress, unaware of her actions, and therefore could not be held responsible for what she had done. In early January of the following year, after nearly 8 hours of deliberation, the jury decided that Lorena could not be held criminally responsible for her actions, as she was in a state of insanity at the time of the offense. However, she was required to undergo a 6-week treatment program at a specialized clinic, after which she was able to return to her previous life. The spouses officially divorced only in 1995, after which Lorena reverted to her maiden name. What became of John later? John remained indignant for a long time that his wife faced no punishment for her actions. He decided to fully capitalize on his sudden notoriety, aiming to extract as much money as possible from such scandalous fame. John founded his own music band called Severed Parts, but the group was short-lived as it failed to garner any public interest. When offered a substantial fee to star in adult films in the late 90s, he did not hesitate to accept. Thus, he appeared in explicit films titled Frankenpenis, a play on Frankenstein, and John Wayne Bobbitt Uncut. John acted in several more films of a similar genre, but interest in him and his reattached organ quickly waned. For a long time, John was eager to appear on various talk shows and gave interviews extensively. But over the years, such offers became less frequent, and the story gradually faded from memory. John then found work as a bartender in an entertainment venue in Las Vegas. And by his 50s, he was struggling to make ends meet by taking jobs as a mover, driver, and pizza delivery man. In 1999, he received a suspended sentence for theft. Regarding his personal life during the high-profile court case that the entire country followed, journalists discovered that Bobbitt had an illegitimate son named Andrew, born in 1992 to one of his lovers, Beatrice Williams. In 1994, John was brought for assaulting his new girlfriend, Christina Elliott, who worked as a dancer in a nightclub. He spent 15 days in jail for this and received probation. In the early 2000s, John was arrested 3 times for assaulting his then-wife, Joanna Farrell. This time, he was imprisoned for a year for violating his probation. They officially divorced in 2004. What happened to Lorena? Unlike her former husband, Lorena did not take pride in her scandalous notoriety and tried to stay out of the limelight. In 1996, she decided to return to her native Ecuador, where her mother, Elia, was living at the time. However, just 6 months later, Lorena made the news again when her mother accused her of assault. The conflict was resolved without going to court, and the women continued to live together. A year later, Lorena returned to the USA, where she opened her own small beauty salon in Washington. In 2007, she founded a foundation called Lena's Red Wagon, which focused on helping women who had suffered from domestic violence. Soon after, Lorena agreed to give an interview for the first time in a long time and appeared on CBS News Morning Show, where she discussed her life post-incident. She also appeared on the popular Oprah Winfrey talk show in the mid-2000s. Lorena remarried, and her new husband was a man named Dave Bellinger, with whom she had a daughter in 2006. She preferred not to recall her marriage to Bob at all, and claimed she did not follow his life after their divorce. In 2009, nearly 15 years after their sensational legal battles had ended, the former spouses met face-to-face for the first time on the show Insider. John apologized to Lorena for the way he had treated her during their marriage, and declared that he still loved her despite everything. Lorena was visibly moved by his words and confirmed that every year on Valentine's Day, her ex-husband still sends her flowers and cards.